It is Wednesday, June 8th, 2022, and this is a meeting of the Committee of the Whole for the Bloomington Common Council. We have 4 items on our agenda this evening. First is Ordinance 22-18 to amend Title 8 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Historic Preservation and Protection to establish a historic district regarding 200 East Kirkwood Avenue, Bloomington National Savings and Loan Association, Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission petitioner. Next, we'll have Ordinance 22-17, an ordinance to amend 21-36 as amended by Ordinance 22-03, which fixed salaries for officers of the police and fire departments for the year 2022, regarding incentives for police officers and increasing probationary officer base pay instead of providing retention pay. Third tonight, we have Ordinance 22-19, an ordinance authorizing the entering into of a conditional project expenditure agreement of the City of Bloomington, Indiana, Meridian Project, and the disposition of the proceeds thereof to Meridian, and authorizing and approving other actions in respect thereto. And finally, we'll have Resolution 22-13 to approve and issue the Plan Commission order found in Plan Commission Resolution RS 2322 regarding authorizing the Bloomington Redevelopment Commission to create a new Meridian Economic Development Allocation Area. With that, we'll start with Ordinance 2218, and I believe we have Ms. Colombrano with us this evening.
Good evening, council members. Let me see if I can share screen very quickly.
And while you're getting set up, Mr. Lucas, I just wanted to confirm, is Councilmember Piedmont Smith with us via Zoom? Not yet. Okay.
Are we good to go? Excellent. So this is the Historic District nomination, HD 2202, for 200 East Kirkwood Avenue. The Historic Preservation Commission is petitioning that the 200 East Kirkwood Avenue, we know it as the People's Bank, and it has a much longer name. I need to get that was just said. Not only be made a local historic district, but also be redistricted from contributing to notable. Bloomington National Savings and Loan Association Bank. Okay. So this property is actually pretty interesting and unique in the sense that it represents an era of dynamic change. So this was built in early 1961, during a time when the densification of the city was changing. The original bank was located around the courthouse square, and it was moved just 2 blocks over so that they could actually have parking lot and have a drive-through, because this specific bank was serving the loans for the houses and the mortgages of the houses and new subdivisions that were being built around the city at the time. And so the clients were also all going to be bringing their cars. The design was also based on the new concept of open floor spaces that hadn't been seen before. This was something that was happening throughout the United States. And this specific building is one of the very few intact structures of its type in Bloomington. The main reason that we are bringing it to you is because it is so pristinely intact. It has had a few changes over time, but it still has its original windows, mullions, limestone facing. It even has the original front awning. It's just covered underneath currently covered underneath the red awning of the People's Bank, but the original awning is still there. So this property is also an exemplary example of the international architectural style, which is a style that tends to be a little bit more vulnerable to redevelopment because it was so minimalist with its clean lines during its time. It also not only is it international style, which is part of the modernist style. So you usually associate that type of building with high rises with skyscrapers in big cities, and this is a very unique sample of a smaller scale structure of this style that served a very localized community using local materials, mainly the limestone, the Bloomington, Indiana limestone. So when I started doing research for this building, this came as a demolition delay. I was able to find some images of when it opened up, and both the interior and the exterior. We're only working with the exterior as part of this, as part of the purview of the HPC. I found this aerial photograph that shows that its location, its placing, and everything is intact. And the only big change has been that the drive-through used to have a roof, and it doesn't anymore. That's basically the only change that we've really found over time. And here are some images for comparison. The proposed size would be, the proposed district would simply be the lot, the entire lot, and the boundary line. So, yeah, that's it for now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Let's come to council for questions. Councilmember Rollo.
Thank you for your presentation. I wondered, you said that this is a rare building type. Are there others? Are there others around
Yes.
the
So
city?
the main sample of this building typology that it doesn't even look the same, but is the most similar, is actually the bank right in front of it, the CVS, that is currently houses the CVS, that is considered a notable building, but is not a historic district either. So none of these buildings are historic districts currently, and neither of them are inside the Courthouse Square Historic District. But other than that, the bank that currently houses the Chase within the Courthouse Square is of a similar typology, but it's slightly later and it's more brutalist. So that's why I've been thinking about this a lot.
I see. And what was the vote at the HPC? What was the support? What was the support at the Historic Preservation Commission?
It was
Unanimous?
unanimous, sorry, words, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? If not, I have a couple. Can you comment on the overall condition of the building? You've said it's pristine and that it is stylistically intact. Is the building itself in good condition as well?
I can't speak for the structural condition or for the interior of the structure. I can only speak from a generalized overview from the exterior. This has been brought to us as part of a redevelopment zone, and the owner's desire to be able to do more with densify the lot rather than due to structural concerns. But if the owner or his architect are here, they might be able to answer that question better.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from council? Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. And the current owners of the building, they're perfectly fine with this designation? Are
Yeah,
they?
I wanted to invite them forward.
They're
Are
here?
the property owners here?
Madam Chair, I believe we have a representative of the property owner here on Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Cover should be able to unmute and start his own video.
And that was Mr. Cover, you said?
Yes, Tim Cover, I believe, is here with us.
Hi, good evening. This Tim, it's actually Cover.
Oh, apologies.
But spelled exactly like Cover. Just got to be different, I guess. I'm representing the owner of the property, Tim Cover with Studio 3 Design. And as far as desire from the owner, they bought the property in an opportunity zone with the intent to increase density on the property, which included taking down the current structure and building new. So we have gone through the process with HPC and voiced that concern or desire. Obviously, there's a different direction that's being presented here as far as to save the structure. But In terms of structural soundness, the building is structurally sound. And again, it's just, unfortunately, it's a small site with the building that's on there, and the two-story structure itself, as far as redevelopment, isn't necessarily conducive to getting the kind of density out of it that you would need for, honestly, the price and value of the land. In terms of historic, we have a gentleman, as part of our group, did a little research as well. And if I may, I'll just read what he wrote, if that's okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So directly across the street from this property, 200 East Kirkwood, is the Snl Building that Gloria just mentioned, that better exemplifies the attributes cited for this designation. Same architectural style of the era, built in 1954, using the same materials mentioned, but also featuring a carved limestone eagle insignia of the Federal Savings and Loan Agency on the facade next to the front entrance. Workingmen's SNL was the dominant SNL originating more home mortgages in the community, more than the combined residential originations of all other financial institutions in the country through the last half of the 20th century. Workingmen's was an excellent and superior example to the one mentioned for this site of an office building of the times that leased space to multiple professionals, including the title companies, and making thrifty, efficient, and complementary use of structure and footprint that exceeded the actual needs of the SNL. As Workingmen's grew, the tenants left for their own facilities until Workingmen's ultimately utilized all 4 levels of the building. Bloomington's National Savings was a minor competitor, taking advantage of an available small residential lot to build near the dominant SNL 5 years after Workingmen's built its building. It was not significant. It was not a significant local institution. It merged with another small SNL to become Fountain Federal. There was a fountain in front of the building in the 1970s. Fountain Federal floundered in the 1980s and was directed by FSLIC to merge with Greencastle Federal, SNL, and then later renamed First United in 1989. That entity had no success and was sold to the holding company of Old National Bank, giving it in entirety to the Bloomington market only. O&B then obtained the Workingmen's building across the street in '96 as SNLs were dissolving. The 200 East Kirkwood SNL is a sub-story to the Workingmen's legacy. Workingmen's built on a larger site that had historically been a tavern, a boarding house, and a butcher. Its founder and managers were well-known and remembered pillars of the community for over 150 years. There is, in addition, well-preserved former commercial bank building of an earlier era on the south side of the square, First National Bank, 2 blocks west of Kirkwood. I believe Gloria mentioned this as well. The Kirkwood corridor has a variety of structures representing eras of styles and materials. I'd argue that 200 East Kirkwood structure is not as critical or as exemplary in the historic inventory. As for preserving the history of the SNL in Bloomington, the Workingmen's story encapsulates this industry and its role in the building of the community much better than this lesser example and site currently being considered. Preserve the character of the Kirkwood corridor without requiring site and structure encumbrances in an attempt to create a second memorial to an industry and architecture much better represented on the opposite corner. It basically expresses, a little of the history, and again, that the owner would prefer to be able to raise this building and move forward with a denser development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cover. And Ms. Colombrania, any comments on that before we come back to council?
I have a few comments. I'll try to keep it brief. But the first one is that, yes, we understand that this came to us as a demolition delay, and that we would try to make an effort to preserve it if possible. The owner originally did not like the idea. So far, the conversations with Tim Cover, who has spoken now, had been more, from what I understood, conciliatory to the possibility of it being designated and to the possibility of having to work with the HPC in order to densify and redevelop the site, including the historic structure. So the idea was never to forbid the growth of the redevelopment of the site, but rather to incorporate the historic structure into the new design. So I believe ideally it would be simpler for the owner if they could start with a clean slate. However, there have been conversations between myself and the petitioner regarding the possibility of it being named and then how to go forward, depending if the building is demolished or depending if it's elevated to a historic district and what the solutions would be. So we have been working on different possibilities. The last thing that I did want to address is that, yes, the building in front of it is an exemplary example of this international style as well. Basically, there are two. The one that came before us for demolition delay was 200 East Kirkwood, and at first, when I first saw it, I was on the fence about whether to nominate it or not, whether this was an effort worth fighting for. But then, when I was doing research, I realized that it was a very intact version of a 1961 building, and that type of building usually disappears pretty quickly. So I am here making that effort, and in the end, the decision will be yours, but I want to make sure that it is as informed a decision as possible before it's a weighty decision to decide whether this piece of 1960s history will remain or whether something completely new will be allowed there. But I want to make sure that that decision is made as informed as possible.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Sandberg, and then Councilmember Sims.
Of course, with an elevation of this type, the building could be more eligible for tax credits, is that correct? For anyone wanting to develop it for maybe more affordable
Unfortunately, being a local historic district does not provide tax credits. It would have to be in a federal historic district or a state historic district, which the owner could begin the process for as well.
Okay, but that would have to be initiated by the owner of the property, not necessarily by the Historic Preservation Commission or us or anything?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sims?
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, Ms. Colombrania. Personally, and we were talking about the drive-through having some significance, but a building across the street from the library, that's the poorhouse now, has a drive-through. So do you, and I'm just speculating, do you think that was influenced by what we're hearing tonight? Because you said it was home loans and car loans and they needed to increase business. So, but I noticed a couple blocks east, it's similar as far as a drive-through window. So was there any connection there?
I could hypothesize that there was. I don't want to give you a guarantee without going into the archives and researching it a little bit more. But it definitely was a trend when the car was popularized during the post-war boom of the late 40s and 1950s, that drive-throughs, it was drive-through culture. And there are actually many books and essays written about the culture. We can question it now, but his, the efficacy and especially with the gas prices rising, and question the car culture. But definitely, it is an interesting marker to see the impact to the landscape that it had in the late 40s and through the mid-1960s when buildings were actually being changed and modified to cater to the car and to people coming in from slightly farther away. Many of the neighborhoods that we know, the subdivisions, I'm thinking Matlock Heights and other types of subdivisions that were made during that era.
Okay, thank you. And also, may I?
Please.
As part of your criteria seeking approval, well, before we do that, you said you had some discussions when you were asked about the owner of the building. You said you had some discussions with the petitioner. And
Conversations
Yes.
more with Tim Kober, and he can also speak to it. Just starting the conversation of what if the building ends up being demolished, not elevated, what ends up happening if the building is elevated and to historic district, and just thinking of potential solution finding in order to accommodate the owner's interests and needs in developing the site.
Okay, did you guys come to common ground with that?
There has been some. I think that Mr. Kober can respond better to what they would prefer, but there's like a plan A and a plan B. Plan A would be more ideal for them to densify more. Plan B would still allow for some development, and Plan B would be if elevation were to happen.
Okay, and I don't have to hear from him tonight, next week, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about that with regard to support from the owner. And I just want to designate between the petitioner being the HPC versus the owner. So, and I'd like to hear one last thing, if I may. Part of your criteria, what I started, historic says exemplifies the cultural, political, economic, social, or historic heritage of the community. And I think part of your research would show, in fact, along with many of the deeds of all the houses that were being sold at the time, had some restrictions, racial restrictions and that sort of thing. I'd be interested in knowing this particular bank that we're asking to designate tonight or next week, if there's anything in your research that can show us that they did anything to mitigate that negative part of history. Since it's kind of listed on all that it's going to do under historic, well, that's historic as well. So I'd just like to hear more about that, unless you have some comments tonight.
Okay, that is an incredibly important question. I am going to do archival research tomorrow, so I'm going to write it down in order to explore that a little further.
Okay, thank you. And I agree with the materials and everything else, but just a few questions I had. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Additional questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes, thank you, and I apologize for being late. I was going to participate from home, but then my internet went out just right before the meeting, so here I am. So I wanted to ask, I understand from I was listening to the meeting on my way, so I understand from the property owner that they want to build something more dense on that site. And I was thinking of the Fifth Third Bank building on 4th Street, just maybe a block away on 4th and Washington, where the building was preserved, but there was an extra story added above it. Do you have any sense, or maybe the owner knows whether that's structurally feasible for this property to add a story?
So I think that the petitioner, Tim Kover, can possibly answer to the structural part a little better, but we are in conversations, if the building is elevated to historic district, of how to densify the lots. So problem solving on that side of how much would stay, how much would grow, if it's going to be completely upward, towards the back, towards the side. We haven't sketched out those ideas quite yet, but I've put them in the calendar, in the agenda for the June 23rd, 2022 HPC meeting, so that if the property is elevated, and there's many ifs here, because we're looking at something with a lot of different potentials. If it is elevated, then the architect would present various ideas to the HPC to see how it can be densified.
This is Tim Cover. May I address your question as well?
Yes, go ahead, thank you.
In terms of structure, the current building as it stands today would not be able to be added onto vertically. Our intent, though, would be if this building is designated, that we would basically build a substructure through the building in order to carry an additional 1 or 2 floors on top of it. So that would be a kind of a totally separate structural system that would have to basically be built through the existing building up above the roof and then structure from there. Our desire is obviously to densify the site and to build a more efficient building. Doing this approach, one, is very costly, and two, realistically, we'll leave if the building is designated. We would, maintain, as Gloria was saying. She and I have been talking, and by the way, Gloria's been great to work with. It's just from the owner's perspective, they would prefer to take the building down. From a architectural perspective, if I'm looking at all options, I've put together an approach as far as structurally to be able to go through the building to start adding onto it. We would also look to add to the south towards the alley behind the building, and part of that renovation would also impact the east side of the facade, which is facing the Graduate Hotel. So currently you have a very small building next to a 6-story structure. So it's kind of, I guess, in the shadows down there. But to Gloria's point, we have been discussing it, and from my side, I'm looking at all options. Thank you.
Could I ask a follow-up? And Mr. Cover, can you give us a hint as to what the use would be if for more dense use of that structure? Would it be residential on top of commercial, or would there be a residential aspect?
The first floor would be still be 100% commercial. The upper levels would be geared towards residential.
Got it. And then, Ms. Colomb, would they be allowed to expand to the east? Isn't that where the drive-through is? Or would they be allowed to expand the building?
That's something that I believe could be done creatively, but I want to see. If the building is elevated, then it would have to go through some negotiations. Like, there are creative ways of giving the illusion or impression or marking that this used to have a drive-through and yet still remain a usable space, mixing through creative mixing of materials and working with the facade so that it does give that marker of this was a drive-through at some point, or this had this sort of different function from the rest of the lot, but still be a usable space. So I'm looking forward to seeing the creative sort of workarounds that Tim Cover and his team might have if it comes to that. Again, I understand there's a lot of ifs going on here, but there having been a drive-through there doesn't necessarily prevent it from being developed or densified in a structural, sort of having a building part there. it all depends on sort of how that is worked with.
And that would also be up to the HPC at
Yes.
that point. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? In which case, let's go to public comment. Anyone here in chambers who would like to? And Mr. Lucas, if you could do the Zoom invitation, please.
Yes, while the folks here in chambers are lining up, if there's anybody on Zoom that would like to speak to this issue, please use the raise hand feature. You can find the raise hand button under your control bar by clicking the reactions tab or the more tab. If you're not able to locate that button, please send a chat to the meeting host and we will recognize you that way. And I do see one hand raised in Zoom at the moment.
Okay, and we have one here in chambers. Let's say 5 minutes. If you would, please sign in, state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes then.
Thank you. My name is Mike Carmen, representing Bailey 8 LLC is the owner of the property. Didn't know Tim was going to be able to make it or not, so I don't need to repeat what he said. He's taken care of most of what would have said tonight, so just a couple supplemental points. The materials that he read, the statement that he's read, actually was prepared by a now retired but longtime member of the local financial institution industry. Spook knowledge, I think 45 years in the business, well acquainted with the Workingman's Building and O&B and the history of the property. So he was the source of the history on that. And I think it's a little bit interesting because some of us, I'm not going to speak for all of you, but some of us still call that the Workingman's Building. It's still the old Workingman's Building. It will never be the old temporarily O&B building. I don't know I'll ever get around to calling it the CVS building, but it will forever be the Workingman's Building. The People's State Bank Building will never be the old People's State Bank Building. That's not going to happen. It's just, that's not what it was. That's not what anybody's going to ever remember it as. The history of that property that was put in those materials, I think, gave you some flavor of what the changes went through in that era, both in that era and followed, and how the growth of those buildings. But the comment, the questions raised about the Fifth Third Bank Building, just is a little bit ironic. It's the same builder. It's the same developer for this that did the Fifth Third Bank Building, that incorporated the Fifth Third Bank Building into what's there now. And I make that point only because if it can be done and it's reasonable to do, he's already done it with under no compulsion. That was not historic designation building. It was no planning commission that said, hey, you have to preserve that building. But structurally and the ability to incorporate that building into a larger structure was available, and he took that opportunity. It's not believed that it's going to work in this corner because primarily for the structural changes that have to be done, as Tim talked about briefly. So, how you make a decision on this, I don't know. We're not going to do that tonight. So last comment, I'm actually, Member Piedmont Smith, I think I'm going to attribute this to you also because I believe this was your comment on a project several years ago and it's going to be your comment in reverse, was, when I drive by this building, am I going to say, wow, I'm glad I approved that building? I can't recall the project, but I'm pretty certain you made that comment when you were on some years ago on a project I was watching. So taking that comment tonight, are you 10 years from now, are you going to drive by this building and say, gee, I'm really glad I sentenced that building to what it is, never to be changed, and I'm glad I did that? I don't think so. And all architectural significance aside, it's a humdrum building. It's not attractive. It has not great utility value in terms of its use. Does it represent something? I'll take it face value of what she has had to say, that she's done her research, and I can accept that. Is that the only representative of that style? No, and as there's some right there. So for me, those are a lot of considerations. Say, let it come down, and would ask you to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Carmen. Let's go to Zoom, Mr. Lucas.
Yes, still only one hand raised, which is the screen name John Lawrence, who should now be able to unmute.
Mr. Lawrence, welcome. You'll have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is actually Jan Sorby on John's computer, so sorry for the surprise. I'm here to talk about this building because I think it's a fantastic building. I'm on the board of Bloomington Restoration Incorporated. I am the chair of the Endangered Historic Committee. And frankly, I'm flabbergasted that the owner is not 100% supporting this. I watched the HPC meetings, and at the time, he said that he really thought it was a fantastic building. And at the time, you know, he was all in on keeping the facade and keeping the integrity of this building. I guess because it's going to cost more now to have some sort of substrata to support more floors. And that's too bad. Both of the buildings are fantastic examples of the international style. And what this shows for our city is it shows as you go downtown, you see the fabulous courthouse square and the 1920s influence, but then you also see the growth that continued to happen to our city. And through these two buildings, it makes a wonderful little pocket of growth that you can say, yeah, stuff was still going on, you know, when these two buildings were established. And frankly, I've got to say that I have always driven by that building and said, wow, that's really a great building. So, you know, I guess, you know, I can love the courthouse and I can love this building equally. They exemplify different times. They exemplify the different aesthetics and really the spirit of the time. So I know that it would be easier for the developer to just start with a clean slate. I understand that, but what is the easiest for a developer is not always what is best for the Bloomington city. And to sort of honor our heritage and honor the character as Bloomington grew and will continue to grow. So thank you very much for letting me speak tonight.
Ms. Sorby? I'm not seeing anyone else in chambers. Is there anyone else on Zoom, Mr. Lucas?
Not that I see, no.
Okay, in which case, let's come back to council for additional questions or comments. Comments or questions? Councilmember Rollo.
Thank you. I find that this meets the criteria for a notable designation. It is a unique structure, and I've seen other buildings like it incorporated within newer designs, so I think that's entirely possible. It's been part of this Kirkwood streetscape for over 60 years, and so I will be supporting the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith, sorry.
Yes, I'm not sure whether I can support this or not, so I'll have another week to think it over. But I do recognize that maintaining this. Well, okay, let me back up a minute. I think it is important to have denser development downtown than 2 stories, which is what this building is. We also need more housing, and this would be an ideal place for it. Because people wouldn't need a car to go to campus or to work or shop downtown if they lived there. I have no question that the expense of adding the substructure, were this approved as a historic district, the cost of the substructure in order to densify would be passed on to the tenants. Making, you know, another luxury housing situation, which is not really the type of housing we need. So I also have to say that, you know, I was born and raised in Bloomington, and I never even noticed this building. It doesn't really stand out, especially with, I mean, and when you do stop and look at it, it's, I mean, to me as a layperson, obviously, not like Ms. Sorby, I'm not on the board of any historic organization, but for me as a layperson, it's just not that attractive. So So these are some things that I'm going to be thinking about. I mean, I do think historic preservation in general is a good thing. It's important to remember the history of Bloomington. I was a history major. After all, this does weigh also in the scales that I have going on in my mind. So I'm going to be passing tonight and thinking this over in the next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sandberg, then Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I will respect the HPC's recommendation on this one. I do think it is important to take a look at the fabric of the downtown. While housing is an important thing, this is prime real estate, and let's not kid ourselves that there will be any affordability as part of any kind of new residential development here. And with respect to that, I think we have heard from the petitioner that they do have Plan B for if this is designated, and they do have to work around the integrity of the structure that will allow for additional residential, which is important. We're seeing a lot of density starting to develop in the downtown and elsewhere. And I think we need to remain balanced in our approach to keeping what is good about the structures in Bloomington and our history, and also allowing the developer to do what they think is important with respect to their plans. So again, I'll be saying yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. We have another week to think about this and digest some things. So tonight I'll be passing, but I always feel better, and with every HPC legislation that I've dealt with since I've been on council, I want to see where the owner and people who are vested in these buildings come to some agreement, and some has, but then some haven't. And then at that point, the HPC becomes like a strong arm, sort of kind, and I don't want to unnecessarily accuse anyone. But I just feel much better when we have common ground, we're able to sit down and work some things out, and that can be reported to us, who ultimately has to make the decision. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about it, but I'll pass this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. I'm going to pass this evening, too. I need to drive by the structure and take a look and drive around and see how it feels to me. I worry about overdevelopment on some of the older structures that are in Bloomington and the streetscape. I kind of worry about that. So I'll do some more research and take a look, and tonight I'll just pass. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll close out some comments here. Generally, I take very seriously the recommendations of the HPC. I don't often feel the inclination to run counter to that, but I do have some questions about the notion of whether or not this is a building that we will treasure in the same way we treasure other buildings in town. Johnson's Creamery essentially created a middle class at a period of time and was very historically significant for that reason. I'm not sensing that same level of social importance here, but I want to give it some additional thought. And I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate the points tonight. So I'll be passing for now, and we'll look forward to the conversation next week. And with that, is there a motion?
Move to pass.
Second.
Thank you. And I'll start on my left. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Pass.
Councilmember Smith.
Pass.
Councilmember Rollo.
Yes.
Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Councilmember Sims.
Pass.
And I will pass this evening as well. So that's 2 yes, 0 no, 4 pass. Thank you, everyone. Okay. With that, we'll move on to item number 2, which is Ordinance 2217, an ordinance to amend Ordinance 2136 as amended by Ordinance 2203, which fixed salaries for officers of the police and fire departments for the year 2022, regarding incentives for police officers and increasing the probationary officer base pay instead of providing retention pay. I believe we have Ms. Shaw with us. Welcome.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for having me. Caroline Shaw, Human Resources Director. I'm here this evening to present Ordinance 2217, which amends Ordinance 2136 as previously amended by Ordinance 2203. which outlined the salaries for officers of the police and fire departments. As you remember, probably about a month ago, the mayor recently announced additional incentives to help us recruit more police officers, and this ordinance will help us do some of that. One of the changes in this this salary ordinance is to add, offer a $5,000 in additional pay for newly hired certified officers, an additional $3,000 for newly hired probationary officers. And on top of that, any existing officer who recommends someone who is eventually hired as an officer will receive $1,000 themselves. And finally, Ordinance 2217 takes away quarterly retention payments for probationary officers. That would have been $4,000 this year. We're just permanently adding it to the base pay. It's easier to communicate. It'll make us we are more competitive at $55,889 for starting probationary officer salary. It's a good thing we're doing. I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Questions from council? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I have a question that's kind of tangentially related. I don't have a question on the main gist of the ordinance. But in the retention pay, it does say that active officers first class, senior police officers, supervisory sergeants who perform at least 400 hours in-person work for the city during the COVID-19 public health emergency are deemed to have performed essential work as essential workers and shall receive an additional premium payment of $1,000 per quarter. So during the COVID-19 public health emergency, is that as declared by the governor of the state of Indiana?
So the reason it has that language is to make us compliant with ARPA, and that's one of the amendments to the ordinance that I did a couple of months, or back at the end of the year. So make us compliant with ARPA. With this change, we will not be using ARPA funds for the retention payments, putting them into base pay for probationary officers. So that is no longer an issue for probationary officers.
Right. I guess I'm wondering, police officers who began with the city halfway through the public health emergency, let's say somebody who started June 1st of 2021, do they still get the $1,000 premium pay per quarter?
We have to evaluate each new person that's hired, and it's hard to say. Likely they do, but we just have to evaluate their start date and the number of hours worked to make sure we're compliant with ARPA.
Okay. All right. I guess I'm just concerned that somebody who started during the pandemic and still did considerable work as an essential worker would not get the
I will look into
funds.
that, but I can't think of, at the moment, I can't think of a situation that fits that scenario, but that's a good point you make. And again, we're being compliant with ARPA as required by the State Board of Accounts.
Because we're using ARPA funds for that part
Yes.
of the salaries. Okay. Yeah, if you could find out
Okay.
for next week, I'd appreciate
Okay,
it.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Sims.
Thank you for telling us about it, Ms. Shaw. I'm wondering, and I think the answer is yes, will you be tracking the effect of the additional pay and incentives going forward, and will you then at some point tell us and tell the public about how we're doing?
I can certainly do that. I mean, these are all things, they're pilot things that we're trying, obviously, to recruit the best and brightest candidates to our police department, which is what we want. That's what this new contract is about that you all support us so well on, and we're hoping all of these things will make it better for our police department.
Yeah, you're able to track all those?
We should be able to.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I
You're
think that's a
welcome.
great thing. Thanks.
Councilmember Sims.
Thank you for the report, Ms. Shaw. Being the HR director, I'm quite sure you can give us numbers and all this stuff. So just right off the top, how is our recruiting going? Do you have any comments on that? This is just in general, not specifically this. I just kind of want to know.
Generally going for police officers, I can't speak to that. In fact, the question from Councilmember Smith, I would work very carefully with Elaine and Chief Dekoff to answer these questions because they really are entrenched in the recruitment, and we know we support them as best we can, but they are hands-on recruiting their officers. So I would have to ask I can ask Chief Dekoff and try to report back next week if you would like that.
Okay.
Hope someone's taking notes for me about what I have to report back on.
What's just an idea? I mean, all employees still go through HR office, so I just wonder if you
They
had
do,
an idea.
but police actually recruit their own officers.
I understand
Yes,
that.
yes.
The last question that I do have is, from a fiscal impact standpoint, I want to know how many that this retention pay, I'm kind of piggybacking on what Councilmember Piedmont Smith, how many are eligible and how many are not? And that'll give us a good idea, unless you know that now.
Well, with this
From the
change,
from the
everyone will
fiscal.
be eligible to Councilmember Piedmont Smith's question, because we won't be using ARPA funds anymore. And the controller and I talked about that. What's the fiscal impact of this? I mean, it's kind of a net, it's basically the same. The funds are no longer going to be ARPA funds. We're just going to use some of the currently available funds from the fact that we don't have all the officers we need right now, because of that, we have pockets of money that can be used towards any new probationary officer coming in, and it helps us easily pay the new probationary officer's salary of $55,889. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Sandberg.
To tag on to Councilmember Sims' question about additional information about tracking what this is doing, I would also like to know, in addition to, is this helping to recruit, is this helping to stop the bleeding? Do we have data on, with all this new information that's coming out about their, being more competitive as a police department, have we seen a little bit of a decline of the officers that are leaving us? So
That's another good question. I'll have to work with Chief
that
Decoff on.
is, recruiting and retention are
absolutely.
extremely important, as we all know. Thank you.
Additional questions, Councilmember Rollo.
Several people brought this up, my colleague, Councilmember Smith, and I'm wondering what an adequate time window would be for data to become available and to assess the effect. So maybe by next time, if we could have that information, when should we be looking for, the desired effect to be
Well, it will
manifest?
depend on the incentive, right? Because some incentives have already been in place, like the housing incentives, but that's obviously not a part of this. But these incentives that I'm presenting to you this evening as a part of the salary ordinance amendment, they haven't gone into effect yet. So it'll be some time after they go into effect, assuming you approve it, which I think you all will.
Will we see within months or a year, or what's your feeling?
That's a really good question. I will also confer with Chief Decoff on that.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? Okay. With that, let's go to the public for comment. We invite those in chambers or on Zoom who would like to make a comment to please approach the podium. Mr. Lucas, could you share the Zoom instructions, please?
Yes, if we do have any members of the public attending via Zoom that would like to comment on Ordinance 2217, you can use the raise hand feature to indicate your desire to comment. You can find that button under the Reactions tab or the More tab in your control bar.
Okay, and I'm not seeing any here in chambers. Mr. Lucas, anyone on Zoom?
Not
Okay.
that I see, no.
Let's just give it another few moments. And seeing none, let's come back to council then for questions or comments. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes, well, needless to say, this is a step in a really good direction, so you will have a very enthusiastic yes from me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments, is there a motion?
Move to pass.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I'll start on my right this time. Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes.
Councilmember Rollo?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. So that is 6-0-0. Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Okay. With that, let's move to Ordinance 2219, an ordinance authorizing the entering of a conditional project expenditure agreement of the City of Bloomington, Indiana, parentheses, Meridian Project, and the disposition of the proceeds thereof to Meridian, and authorizing and approving other actions in respect thereto. We have quite a crowd with us tonight on this item. Who will be starting this evening? Mr. Dietz, I believe. Welcome.
Thank you. It'll take me a short moment to get the presentation on, but Just bear with me here. There we go. I'm Rick Dietz. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you this evening. We have a very exciting project to talk about, and we look forward to sharing that with you and entertaining any questions that you might have about this. I'll just go ahead and jump right in if we're all ready. So in this presentation, we'll walk through a few basics before digging into the story of this project. We'll start out with a few items that will come up further in our discussion, as well as if you talk with individuals from Meridian, additional city staff members will be referring to some of these concepts, including an open access network, which is essentially a wholesale network where there's a network owner, operator, developer that maintains the network as a network but doesn't themselves serve as an ISP. They contract with ISPs, multiple ISPs, potentially to operate on that underlying network. Network neutrality is a concept that the internet service providers should not discriminate against content, whether to advantage other businesses against each other, or to discriminate on the basis of content in their network. Digital equity is essentially encapsulates a program calling for the fair distribution of internet and the benefits of modern technology throughout a community without regard to equity issues within that community. Digital equity has been a major focus of efforts within my department for the last couple of years, starting in 2022 or 2020 with the pandemic. Okay. We'll be talking a lot about fiber optic communication, essentially the underlying technology for transmitting information at close to the speed of light from one location to another. And a little bit more specifically, we'll be talking about the infrastructure that's involved with that, either burying underground or hanging on utility poles of fiber optic cable, which is the premier delivery mechanism for internet services. It's scalable into the future, and the capacity is generally only limited by the hardware that is deployed and managed on each end of the fiber optic cable, making it extensible well into the future. For your information, the city maintains a modest fiber optic network connecting its various facilities, and also providing dark fiber services to the school corporation, Monroe County government, and the public library as part of its BDU initiative. And essentially, this is the technology which is the basis of the network that we're discussing here today. So why are we here broadly? The city has long sought a partner to ensure that Bloomington residents and businesses have ubiquitous, affordable, high-speed fiber connectivity. This is an initiative that goes back to 2016 and even further in Mayor Hamilton's campaign for office. This was a huge priority then. It continues to be a priority for us now. An additional part of our effort and reason for being here is to secure the benefits of modern technology, of these platforms for all in our community, to benefit our community's efforts in education, healthcare, to connect us to one another through technology and more, and do that regardless of income, of neighborhood, of any other factor. We have been working very hard and see this as an essential part of our program to bridge the digital divide and address the digital equity gaps that we know exist in our community, and also to enhance the Bloomington's competitiveness as a leading innovative community and a target for investment in new businesses and to develop our local economy. The overall goals of this program, as are originally articulated when we first began looking at this, are to ensure that we have a community-wide network, that its benefits are broadly distributed in our community, and that we have a say in the deployment of the system as well as its operations, that this system be financially stable, resilient, and durable, a long-term investment that we can count on, and that it helps us to bridge the digital divide. So right now, the FCC defined broadband as 25 up, or 25 download and 3 up megabits per second. But that's not adequate. We know that. We know that we need to go well beyond that throughout our community. We also know that inequalities exist within our community, particularly in low-income households, but also families more broadly with children and older residents. For instance, there's a homework gap that impacts low-income students, and many residents can only access the internet through their phones. We need reliable internet, reliable high-speed internet now as a basic function of work, not just for those that work remotely, which is increasing, but also for individuals in non-remote or hybrid employment. There's a greater expectation to be able to be connected as part of just about any, as in a large number of employment scenarios. From our experience in the COVID-19 pandemic, this highlighted even more the need for high-speed, ubiquitous broadband that anyone can use in our community, and reiterated to us the need to continue to press forward in this area. We also know that current providers' subsidy programs, while we know that they exist, they aren't attracting users and they don't go far enough, particularly in addressing equity issues. And we know that incumbent providers don't want greater competition in their environment. That's natural as a business interest, but we believe that competition is better, and there's no right number of providers for our community. Is it 1 but not 2, 2 but not 3, 3 but not 4? And if it should be a certain number, then, well, why not 1 that does it right? But what we believe is there should be a competition, it should be robust, and it should be open to new entrants to make our broadband environment more competitive and available to everyone. As a aside on this, the Meridian network that they're proposing as an open access network would not only usher in a new ISP that would compete in our local environment, but after a period of 5 or 7 years, depending on performance, it would be an open access network on which any ISP could enter our marketplace, or incumbent ISPs could use this service to expand their reach further into the market. Another question is, why would we not want a new provider options? What would be the downside of this to residents and businesses? There's not really a clear downside at all, but we expect greater choice for local residents, generally a lower cost and a competitive service, and potentially even better customer service. But one of the things that we know is that we'll have a lot of new compelling options that emerge from Meridian's plans. You'll also hear that there's services that are already provided at a fast rate. We're aware of that. A lot of times these are marketed as up to X speeds, up to 100 megabit, up to 50, not at 50, not at 100. And that's something that we have seen. I have personally experienced this throughout the years with my service provider not having consistent speeds. And there's also promises of, well, we'll meet these goals, we'll do these things in a few years, but we first heard those in 2016, and those few years, are many years now, and our residents need better service, not as a potential, but as a reality. And so we have been working to make that happen. A quick look at the history of this project. As you might recall, in 2016, we issued a request for information, an RFI process, where we received 21 submissions to that. We whittled it down through a process of discussion and negotiation to 12, then 6, 4, 2, and 1, to ultimately come to an agreement that we wanted to enter into negotiations with Axia. They offered the best combination of features that met our goals, but they were purchased. They were bought by a large investment fund, which instantly pivoted their market focus to other areas, large suburbs of incredibly large cities, which we are not. We talked intently with a number of other parties, some of which were inside of the RFI submissions, some that came from out. One of those was Metronet, who also rose to the fore as we were reaching the point, or as we were working on the potential contract with them. They merged with another company, who also a large company, who pivoted its market away from ours, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective and where we are right now. Throughout this process, we've engaged with our local incumbent providers, but they were not pursuing fiber to the premise actively, or their objectives were not in alignment with ours. Then in 2020, COVID-19 appeared. We had a massive shutdown of activity, shift to remote work in a number of sectors, and that illustrated to us the increased importance of moving forward with this project. In 2020, we began work on our digital equity strategic plan, first with a community-wide survey, and then the plan was released at the end of the year and helps to guide a number of aspects of activity within my department now, within the ITS department, as well as elements feeding into this project. In late 2020, we began discussions with another company, Wired. That was also an incredibly promising prospect. We had very good discussions with them, multiple site visits. They were also purchased by a large investment firm, and their market focus shifted as well, leaving us out of their target areas. But as a result of that discussion and business and professional relationships between Wired and Meridium staff, they agreed to hand off information from their site visits, diligence information to Meridium, which helped Meridium bootstrap conversations with us. And let me see here. Sorry. We had a friendly handoff of information from Wired to Meridium, which then has resulted in a letter of intent that has been signed with both parties, identifying our shared principles. And from that point to the current day, we have been working intently on a master agreement, on a comprehensive digital equity initiative. On our side, we have worked to inventory the city assets that we have in our conduit network. There have been multiple site visits and hundreds of meetings and contacts to get to this point. Let me tell you quickly a little bit about Meridium. They are an international public infrastructure developer, investor, and manager. They are based in France with their U.S. headquarters in New York City. They are uniquely, from the partners that we have talked with over the years, a benefit corporation, which means that they have both fiduciary responsibility to their investors to turn a profit, albeit with a long time horizon, and incorporate environmental, social, and corporate governance goals, in particular those emerging from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, into their operations. So they are equally concerned with ensuring that their business is financially successful as they are to ensuring that they are taking care of these important social objectives as well. Including equity, and that is what I think emerges most strongly in our digital equity plan. Their main focal areas as a business are in infrastructure, transportation, energy transformation, and fiber optic networks. And we find them a uniquely good fit with our overall fiber objectives, with our digital equity efforts, and broader community values. So we're here specifically because, as part of this effort, Meridium has requested, and the city administration supports the creation of a allocation area, a Tif allocation area, to cover business personal property, the business personal property of Meridium as they install their fiber infrastructure and network equipment throughout the city. Taxes collected in the Tif would be rebated to Meridium by the city, and this is desired to facilitate the build and to achieve the objectives of Meridium and the city in this project. So what's the project? It's to build a gigabit speed fiber optic network, an open access network. As discussed before, Meridium is not an ISP, and after a time-limited exclusive period with a new ISP, the network will be open to other ISPs. They are proposing to make greater than $50 million investment, which includes the creation of new jobs and establishing a Bloomington office. They are promising full community coverage throughout our community. Our contractual bottom line is 85%, but we both expect that to be significantly greater given the designs that we're looking at. The cost of the ISP service will be competitive in our local marketplace. Meridian has promised to adhere to the principles of network neutrality. There are provisions to protect the city's interest and provide a voice at the table, including a 10-year span where they will not transfer the network to another party. That being said, their general investment horizon is on the order of 25 years, and to date they have never sold an asset that they have built or acquired. There's a regional aspect to this project. We're considering a TIF within the corporate boundary of Bloomington, but this is a project where as our discussions proceeded, we discovered there were significant commonalities in some of our local communities, and thus a common opportunity. So Columbus, Shelbyville, and Martinsville are part of this larger project, so they will receive service that is equivalent to what we are working towards and negotiating here. The build of the network, provided that we can move forward with our request here, will start this year and will conclude in 3 years or less. And then my favorite element of this among many is the digital equity initiative that we have designed. Income qualifying households will be able to receive 250 megabits per second service up and down, download and upload at $0 per month. It's essentially a cost of $30 to the ISP, but that will be offset by the $30 Biden-Harris administration Affordable Connectivity Program subsidy. There's no connection fees to come onto the service. Meridian is proposing to establish a equivalent of a digital equity staff member to assist the community in connecting to the network, and has agreed to place $85,000 into the city's digital equity fund. Eligibility for the program is incredibly important and something that we've had a lot of discussions about. We don't want to establish our own separate eligibility program, so we're looking to a number of state and federal programs to serve as a marker for eligibility. So participants in the SNAP program, Indiana's TANF program, and others, will serve as eligibility for this benefit. And the most exciting one is one that we've recently worked on, is that HUD housing vouchers, Section 8 housing vouchers, with some kind of modest exceptions, will be part of this eligibility criteria, and all of the units that are part of Bloomington Housing Authority's apartment complexes are eligible. This digital equity initiative helps us reach a number of our digital equity goals that were articulated in our digital equity strategic plan, including expanding the digital equity fund, establishing a digital equity navigator, removing economic barriers to adoption that existed, to recruit new competitive fiber broadband providers, to consider public-private partnership as a method to make this happen. But, but I would suggest that this public-private partnership is a lot more on the private side than public, but we nevertheless are strongly supporting it, and to build and connect fiber to Bloomington Housing Authority's apartment complexes. This is a quote from one of our consultants, Joanne Hovis, who's president of CTC Technology and the Coalition for Local Internet Choice. She's been a strong voice and advisor throughout this project. I won't, read this, but I will suggest that as we understand it, this digital equity program would be among the, if not the best in the United States if it goes into place. The city's overall contributions to this project with Meridian include a $1 million pledge to add to our digital equity fund to support connections of low-income households to the network. We have agreed to partner in a very active way in the digital equity initiative with Meridian, and we are proposing to provide access to unused digital underground conduit, which brings us to the Tif request. We've been engaged, and the council is part of a public tax increment finance project, which has moved through the redevelopment commission and also involves a number of bodies. Other folks can speak to the details of this series of meetings, but there's a lot of moving parts to make this happen. And again, Meridian has requested and the city supports creating this Tif Allocation Area to cover the business personal property that Meridian will invest in as they install this network. The business personal property involved includes the conduit, fiber optic cable, electronics, computer equipment, tools, et cetera, involved in this project. And this kind of TIF, which at least when it's been applied to telecom companies, is sometimes referred to as a spider TIF because it essentially tracks the tendrils of the network. And the total TIF value estimated across 20 years is $14.4 million, minus the city's cut for administration fees. This is what the Tif District looks like. Essentially, it's the corporate boundary of the city of Bloomington. What you're seeing here is a early map, or maybe a mid-level map of the network as it stands, with aerial and underground infrastructure there, aerial being blue and underground in red. So why do we want to use TIF, a TIF mechanism for this project? First of all, it's necessary to support the project. All of this wouldn't happen if we didn't make this contribution to the project. There is no tax increase to the public from the establishment of this TIF. There's not a drop in funding either for other taxing units, not a decrease in funding. Plus, we anticipate new revenue from employment, other taxes being paid, property purchases, maybe rental for various businesses, et cetera. And so why business personal property tax TIF versus other potential mechanisms? First, this is a transparent process. It involves multiple boards, a significant public airing of the project. It provides the city with visibility into the tax amounts as they are coming in and then are redistributed to Meridian, and it allows us to capture 5% of the incoming costs for city administration costs. Other places in Indiana have business personal property tax Tif districts that have been created in the last few years. This is only the last few years because it's an incredibly common tool. West Lafayette, Wabash, Greendale, et cetera, are among those. And then there's other communities in Indiana which have used this property tax type of TIF specifically for telecom infrastructure in the last few years, which includes Crawfordsville, Wabash, Lafayette, Franklin, Huntington, Lebanon, and Manchester. So these would be our peers in using this tool to provide support for improved broadband. So in summary, what we have on the table with the Meridian project is a community-wide gigabit fiber to the premise network that is open access, essentially a wholesale network after an exclusivity period. It's built by a very unique partner. Meridian is a business benefit corporation committed to sustainability and equity as part of their core goals. We have a groundbreaking digital equity program with 250 megabits per second up and down with no startup fees at $0 a month for income qualifying qualifying units. Which we fully expect to have, and what we have been hoping to achieve with efforts emerging from our digital equity strategic plan, is a real community impact in digital equity. This effort attracts a high-tech company that wants to make a $50+ million investment in our community, including establishing local jobs. The network will be operated by Hoosier Networks LLC, which will be headquartered in Bloomington to support the Indiana operations of Bloomington, Columbus, Shelbyville, and Martinsville networks. There's no tax increase using the TIF funding mechanism and negligible impact on other taxing units. And I thank you so much for considering this transformational project. I'll leave up this quote here from Blair Levin, who was the architect of Barack Obama's administration's national broadband plan. He has also been an advisor in this process throughout the many years that we have been working on it. And he is as excited about this as we are. So that ends my presentation, but not the presentation. I'd like to invite Rich Starkey will come up to tell you perhaps a little bit about the Spider TIF architecture, and then we'll, after that, I'll come back up and then we'll conclude the presentation.
Welcome. And can you share your full name again for us, please?
Sure. It's Rich Starkey. I'm with the law firm of Barnes & Thornburg.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thanks for having me. So a little over 10 years ago, the city came to us with a request just like this. Said that a fiber entity wanted to come in and bring fiber in, but the capital expenses were so expensive that they needed some kind of incentive. And so we came up with this idea of the Spider TIF to help them. As you may know, tax increments used for various things, and unfortunately, the statute won't allow you just to give taxes back to an entity. So we had to devise a system, and the system we came up with was an agreement based upon the old industrial development bond statutes that allow entities to benefit from bond issues or obligations from a city in order to take advantage of tax-exempt financing. Well, in this case, we're not taking advantage of that, but what we're doing is we're using the TIF that's generated under the agreement, which we call the Project Expenditure Agreement. And under that agreement, the city agrees to pay back over time the taxes that are paid on the business personal property of the fiber. So fiber is taxed as personal property on a per linear foot, and as those taxes are paid, the agreement says that those taxes are then basically sent back to the company pursuant to the agreement. But in order to do that agreement, we have to have several steps that go into place, the first of which the Redevelopment Commission passed a declaratory resolution this past Monday. And that declaratory resolution says that we have an economic development plan, which is a plan to assist Meridian in the fiber. And we set up the area, which we call both the economic development area and the allocation area. That allocation area is actually placed where the fiber is. So wherever the fiber is strung, either in the air, on poles, or underground, that becomes the TIF allocation area. So as the taxes are paid, it goes back to the Redevelopment Commission to the allocation fund for the allocation area, and then paid pursuant to the agreement back to the company. And the process then is for the Redevelopment Commission to pass the declaratory resolution, which they did. It then went to the Plan Commission to say that this comports to the plan of development for the city of Bloomington. The Plan Commission has done that. And then it will come before you, the council, to approve it as far as the Plan Commission approval, to say, yeah, we agree that it's part of the plan of development, but also to approve the agreement itself, because it's an obligation of the Redevelopment Commission. And the council has the final say on all obligations of the Redevelopment Commission to approve those. So that's what is part of this with the ordinance. Then it will go before another public hearing. We'll notice a public hearing before the Redevelopment Commission with at least a 10-day notice, and come back on July 5th before the Redevelopment Commission to approve the final, what they call the confirmatory resolution, to confirm everything has been done up to this point. So it's a little bit of a process, but it's a process that, as you saw, has been done in many other communities to assist fiber providers with some incentive to help them with the capital costs. You're all looking at me like you're not sure what to say.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have Larry. Yeah, Larry. Sorry.
That concludes your remarks, I think?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any questions.
Well, we'll take questions in just a second. I have Larry Allen come up, and he can share a little bit about how this fits in the overall process, and then I'll conclude.
Thank you, Larry Allen, Assistant City Attorney. I only have a 45-minute presentation on the process, so if you'll bear with me here. I'm just kidding. I think Mr. Starkey actually handled most of that pretty well. I'll just one clarification. So we've split this up. We've kind of bifurcated this into two parts, which is Ordinance 2219 and then Resolution 2213. So the Ordinance 2219 is the approval of that expenditure agreement that Mr. Starkey just outlined. That will be heard before your final approval, before the second reading of that next week. That will be heard and recommended, or if they recommend it, excuse me, by the Economic Development Commission next week on next Tuesday. The second part of this is the creation of the TIF area, and that's the Resolution 2213, I believe. 2213 is the resolution. And the Plan Commission has not yet considered that. They will do that Monday, but again, before your final approval on that. So just clarifying that process, and this is kind of like a parallel track to get both the expenditure agreement approved, but also the TIF district established as well, so that we have those pledge of redevelopment funds, the TIF funds from the allocation area, back to the company. So just that clarification. Thank you very much.
So this is a very intriguing and powerful opportunity for us, and I've kind of can see this project through a number of different lenses. And for one, we have a private telecom company who wants to build a community-wide open access, net neutral, high-speed fiber optic network in Bloomington. We also have a company that wants to make bridging the digital divide in Bloomington a central pillar of their business, offering virtually unmatched world-class digital equity programming. There's a high-tech company that wants to invest more than $50 million in Bloomington, creating new jobs and employing local construction firms for part of the build-out. There's a network company that wants to make its office in Bloomington the regional hub of a broader Indiana network, elevating our friends and neighbors in Columbus, Seymour, and Martinsville as well. And there's an international benefit corporation committed to equity, sustainability, and transformative infrastructure who wants to open a business in Bloomington. So what do we say to that? Our answer is yes, and how can we help you? Of course, those companies are really one company that's Meridium is proposing to do all of those things. And establishing this Tif District is the way that we can help make that happen. So I hope you'll consider this request favorably, and we would be happy to answer any questions that you have. There are a number of city staff members physically present here in the council chambers, as well as I think maybe a few online. And then we also have Scott Lehman and Willie Williams, who are here with Meridium and also able to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dietz. And if the council will indulge me for a second, just to keep myself organized, we won't have a parallel set of presentations for 2213, right? We've essentially laid the foundation here.
No, this is the
Okay.
presentation.
Just checking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although, I mean, I'm happy to indulge you. We've been working on this a while.
And actually, if you wanted to, that's okay, just planning. So, thank you very much, Mr. Dietz. I know we have several members of the public here who may want to comment. We're going to come to council first for some questions, a round or two perhaps, then go to public comment, then come back to council. So just to preview that. And I'm guessing there are questions. I'm going to start on my far left, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I want to start with a very basic question. As an internet user and a layperson as far as computer networks goes, don't we already have a high-speed internet, broadband network in Bloomington? So is this going to duplicate that? Sorry if that's a naive question, but I need to start at the beginning.
We have broadband providers within our community, some of which provide higher speed than others in different locations, but there are many that are left out. There is not a fiber provider covering all of Bloomington, and there's no provider that is proposing the type of digital equity plan that is part of this project, or network neutrality, or a number of the other elements of this project that we think are important and transformative.
So what exists now is fiber optic cable that is owned by the service providers, and each one uses their own, or how does it work now?
Yeah, that's correct. All of the current providers are the owners and maintainers of the infrastructure, and also generally the sole provider of ISP services on their networks, their respective networks, yes. This is unique in that Meridium would deploy fiber optic infrastructure everywhere, that an initial ISP would come in to the community as a new provider, offering additional competition to end users, and then after a period of time, any number of other potential ISPs, whether they be local, a new local business. If you wanted to start an ISP, you would be able to reach all of the homes that the Meridian Network reaches, and incumbent providers could utilize that network to reach homes that they don't currently have fiber infrastructure available at.
So currently, I mean, I live right in the city, so currently, I mean, I could have my choice between 3 different providers. Are you saying that AT&T, Xfinity, Smithville, they all have the same, use 3 different sets of cables that run down Rogers Street, for example?
Of course, that is what they do.
Okay. So now we're going to have a 4th cable running down
We would have a
Rogers Street.
4th, but with the entry of an open access network, anyone who comes in would be able to utilize that, and we could have essentially a growth of competition, but without installing additional infrastructure.
Thank you for humoring a layperson. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good start.
And I would also say, just as a corollary to that, a company like Smithville, for instance, who has some pockets of coverage within the community, at the end of this exclusivity period, they would be able to reach every home in Bloomington without building that infrastructure themselves. And in addition to that, they would be able to reach every home within Columbus, Shelbyville, and Martinsville as well.
But the Hoosier Networks LLC would be in charge of maintaining that.
They would own and operate the open access network, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rallo, then Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. Mr. Dietz, I want to have a number of questions, but I'll begin because you put a priority on digital equity and benefit for all. Yet my understanding of the coverage is only approximately 85%. That's the commitment, 85% plus. Why not insist on 100% if we're interested in benefits for all, for the entire community? Why aren't we having 100% coverage as part of our agreement?
85% is what we have currently negotiated in the contract, that the intent is to go much higher than that. The primary reason for it not being 100% is to accommodate for lack of being able to pass through private rights of ways, and potentially other geographic factors. But the goal is to reach as far as we possibly can. If Scott is willing to step up and address that question, I'll invite him. Mm-hmm.
Welcome. Could you share your name, please, and affiliation?
Sure. Scott Lehman with Meridium. The reason for the 85% is in order to facilitate the network, we can't go out and engineer every single element and understand every underground component of the city. So we put in an allowance for, as Rick mentioned, potential private right-of-way restrictions or congested city right-of-way. Our intent is to get as close to 100% as possible, but until we get well into the project, we can't understand all the potential impacts. As the city continues to expand, we've got to take a look at things like bridge crossings, railroads, and some of these other longer permit requirements that we need to make sure we take into consideration. But I want to be clear that our intent is to go as close to 100% as possible. And the most important part is it's with fiber. And fiber is the technology as you look forward in terms of enabling up to a 10 gigabit speed connection into every home, every residence here in Bloomington. There is broadband as established by the FCC throughout the city today. And the question is how that will support the future requirements here in Bloomington. And that's what we're really trying to make sure that as we partner in with the city and come up with this deployment strategy, that we are in a position and enable Bloomington to be in a position to really look at the forward-looking technologies, applications, and requirements for the citizens, the residents here in Bloomington.
Thank you. May I just follow up to say,
Yes.
Mr. Dietz, you mentioned the contract, so I assume you have a contract available. Could we see it?
We do not have a contract available at this time. We are still negotiating elements of it, but we are fairly close to that.
Okay, we're asked to approve of funding to facilitate a contract, but we don't have the contract yet.
Like I said, we are close to having that signed and executed. The provisions that we discussed tonight are essentially that contract.
Okay, would you have it, when would you have it in hand so that we could see the contract that's been negotiated?
I'll hand that over to our corporation counsel, Beth Kate.
I suspect not before our next meeting, but I'd like to know is what's the time horizon so that we can examine the contract ourselves?
Beth Kate, Corporation Counsel, good evening. We are, as Mr. Dietz said, excuse me, finalizing our negotiations with Meridium, and I would expect that we would be able to provide counsel with a copy of that contract, I would say before your next meeting. Okay, and if not, very soon thereafter.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. I'm not quite sure who to point this question to, Mr. Dietz. We might start with you, but we might need legal. In my doing the research on this to try to understand what's in front of us here, I've had to contact a lot of people, and so this is a layman, but I'm formulating a question that's coming from somebody that does have broadband and internet expertise. But apparently, fiber optic infrastructure can be classified as real estate and put into an infrastructure REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, and then therefore realize significant tax advantages. Now, IRS in several states allow this, I'm understanding. Does Indiana allow this? And then why does Meridium need a tax abatement? That's the question. And then the second part of that question is, did the city offer it to them, or did they ask for it?
The first question, I'm not sure about in terms of the Indiana, tax benefits related to fiber deployment, but that's something that we can certainly look up and get back to you.
And then with the last part as to who offered what, who asked for what, and why is this TIF required of us before we even?
Yeah, the TIF was requested by Meridium to be able to do this project.
Okay, so Meridium did ask for it.
That is correct.
Thank you. I'll have more later.
Okay. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Dietz. For a while, us as council members, legislators, been talking about a lot of different programs and buckets and, that sort of thing. And one of the words that come out that I focus on is transformational. And I will say that from what I'm hearing tonight, this is indeed one of the few that can be transformational. So I'm looking to hear more about it as we move forward and before we approve, but just something kind of out there and that may not be a part of this, but obviously I want to know, has part of this conversation involved annexation possibilities with regard to cost, potential? And I know you can't commit because we don't have it, but anticipation, have we had those conversations?
Yes, yes, we have. That has been a factor in our conversations. What you are looking at this evening is this TIF request. The TIF request is somewhat obviously constrained by the boundaries of the city of Bloomington, the current boundaries. The boundary that we are operating with in Meridium includes the annexation areas. So it's their intent to build within the corporate boundary of Bloomington and cover the annexation areas. We want the areas that are currently part of the city to be lit up and provided service first, but we also want those areas to be covered for the benefit of all of the residents of our broader community, not just those who are within the current boundaries of the city.
Thank you. Good answer.
Oh, thank you. So I have a slightly different kind of question. So, I'm a layperson as well. And the question some constituents have asked me is, why don't we just do it? Why doesn't Bloomington just do this? And not to cast any aspersions on Meridian, but I mean, why don't we just do this ourselves and make it a public utility?
That is a good question. There's a number of ways to answer that. One is it would cost us the same as it costs Meridian to do this, and they're coming to this project bringing capital from their own funds, whereas we would have to find a place to pull together $50 million for the capital investment. Another answer is we currently do not provide this type of service to the public or businesses. We have some partners in the school corporation and others who are using dark fiber, but we're not providing broadband service. So we currently are not operating as a utility, so we would have to establish that as a utility. Another aspect of this is if we were to move forward with this, the state legislature would shut it down probably in all likelihood within like one session. There's not a great fondness amongst local or amongst telecom providers who are very influential in the state capitol. And that's why you don't see a whole lot of homegrown broadband networks in Indiana. Another facet of this is if Bloomington had its own electric utility, then I can practically guarantee we would be operating a fiber network, either as a utility or on a wholesale basis already. Communities that have that kind of infrastructure, as they are building out like the smart grid, are put fiber along the poles that they already own, and they build out a network that way. But we do not have a public power utility. So I think those are the 3 or 4 major factors that come to mind. There would be a number. There could be a number of others, and I'll give some thought to that and get back to you. But it would be a substantial effort at which we are not experts in, and there's a number of high risk scenarios to going down that path. And we think we have a lot less risky, in fact, almost risk-free project here with Meridian footing the bill and given their experience with this. Thanks.
I have a couple different follow-up questions. Should I wait for another round?
If it's related to this, why don't we go ahead and take it right now? If it's
a different kind of question area.
okay, that's right. Other round one questions. If not, I'll take a run at this. A question for Mr. Lehman, please, if I may. So, and thank you for the comments you offered earlier. Can you, again, layperson, I'm a fundraiser in my day job, so can you walk me through the process by which you choose the ISP? How does that work? How do you make that decision? What criteria do you use?
So we look at groups that are really
Can
focused.
you pull the mic up to you a little
Sure.
bit? Thank you.
We look at groups that are focused on the local community. Because one of the things in the way Meridian funds and runs its network, because we're not a telecoms company, we're an investment fund. So we look at making the investment into the 4 networks you've heard about today, and then we hire the decision-making team here in market to drive that process. And then as we look at the ISP that we will select, it will be a group that's equally focused on the local community with decision-making authority in the community. It's going to be a group that is, at the softball games. They're at the soccer games. They're working with the local community, engaged with the low-income community. Those are the types of groups that we're evaluating as we take a look at what's the best fit for our network, because we believe local networks should be locally focused with local decision-making.
Okay. Thank you. I may come back to that. What ISPs have you contracted with in other cities where you've done such a project?
Currently, the project that's most advanced is in Edmonton, at least in North America. Then we've got projects that are over in Europe. And in Europe, we've partnered with one of the wireless carriers over there. And then up in Canada, we've partnered with a group called Distributel, who is one of the largest ISPs, one of the largest competitive ISPs in Canada.
All using the same model of local decision makers?
All using exactly the same model. These are groups, we come in, provide the infrastructure to deliver the various services, and then they focus on the local sales, marketing, customer support type of initiatives.
Okay. And one more question related to ISPs, and I'll have others, but 5 to 7 years is that initial window. I'm assuming we're going to eventually come up with something more definite than 5 to 7. I'm assuming we're going to have a period of time in this contract that we'll see. That seems like a long time in the IT world. Is it, or can you
Not
help
really.
me
When we take a
understand
look
that?
at the ISP selection, we want to make sure we've got one partner that's committed through the construction process, and that's a fairly lengthy process as we move through the market. It can be, as we've identified, 3 years, and so we want to have a partner that's committed through that process. When I mention ISP selection and local community involvement, we're looking at a group that's going to come in and make millions of dollars in investment into this market, because we want somebody who's going to stick with us in this project. One of the things as you take a look at the open networks that you have to take a look at is, do you have groups that might shift in and out depending on the success in the market? We believe in partnering with a group that's going to be fully committed to the city of Bloomington for a period of time. And then at the end of that 5 years, if successful, then they can extend that based on their market penetration, demonstrating their, the satisfaction of the customer base here in Bloomington.
Extend that at whose discretion? The same extend that at whose discretion? The same decision-making team, or at your discretion, or?
It's based on performance. If they hit certain performance metrics in the market, which is to say they've got a certain amount of take rate, which is to say the community has been happy with the service they're providing, then we would extend that period of exclusivity.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
What is the will of the council at this point? Do we want to do another round of questions? Do we want to hear from some members of the public and then do more questions? One more round. Okay. Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. This is a follow-up to a question that Councilmember Smith had posed, and this is for our administration. Going back to the history and the backstory as to how we got from Axia to here, with Axia, it's my understanding that when that all fell through, there were 2 communities that they were working with, Bloomington, and I believe it was Fort Collins. Is that correct?
I believe there were more than that. It just so happened that Bloomington was, for lack of a better word, the tip of the spear. We were the furthest along in our conversations with them. And then there were, I think, maybe 4 or 5 other communities that were in that process.
The reason why I ask is I think it's Fort Collins that went ahead after Axia fell through. They went ahead to develop their own public infrastructure. Is that kind of your understanding as well? And if it's not, I'd like to have more of a backstory there. Is Fort Collins a similar city to Bloomington, or are they far superior to us in terms of their tax base or their economy or what have you, as to why they chose to go the public route and why we're now going this route?
I will look that information up for you. I'm happy to do so. I suspect they either have a state government that is either accommodating or at least accepting of municipal broadband, or they have a public utility that where power is part of the equation there.
I think that would be helpful, so thank you
Yeah.
for providing
I'm
that for the
happy to
next
do-
time.
happy to do that.
I'd just like to know how that's doing. You know, is that causing issues? Are they healthy? Is that going strong? Because again, my understanding is, and this could be wrong too, that broadband is a pretty high profit margin business. Is that correct? Maybe you can confirm that for me. That should lead us to ask, you know, maybe this is in the best interest of a city to do it on our own and not go through a third party. If this is something that we do feel is transformative, and obviously the digital divide is something that who could be against? You know, we're all for the ultimate goal here, but I think what some of us are going to be grappling with is this the best route? Do we know that for sure? So thanks, if we can get more.
I would say that, at least in my perspective, this is probably about the best achievable path that we have. Meridium is not is not an ISP. It has a much broader perspective and a much more broad civic and social interest in our community. It's not entirely public either, so it's not entering into the the sphere where I think almost certainly the state legislature would not allow us to proceed to develop a fiber optic network as a utility. It's something that we have considered. There's a perspective, and that gets back to some of our early recommendations within the RFI process, and then also in the digital equity plan that we need to explore a public-private partnership as the best avenue to move this forward successfully.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rollo.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Camilleri. My question has been asked. My next question is about the telecom fund and whether the Tif, Spider Tif, in any way affects revenue that we would see from the telecom fund.
It does not. The telecom fund takes as its revenue source a fraction of the revenue generated from video services that are provided within the city. So traditional cable is in that category, as well as that's pretty much it. So that fund, as I've mentioned many times, that the budget has been declining with the uptake of essentially of folks that are cutting the cord, as it were, to use digital, entirely digital platforms for video services. But there's not an intersection with the TIF and this.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. I wonder if, does Indiana University factor in, like collaboration on this? And if it does or doesn't, if you want to talk about that for a second, that would be helpful. Thank you.
They do. They have been a group we have consulted with throughout this process. You may or may not know that IU operates what's called the Global Research NOC, Network Operations Center, which supports the Internet 2 network as well as a number of other national and international networks. So they have a very strong foundation and expertise in networks. So they have been good advisors for us along this path. They have encouraged us, I would say, at a low level, in a low level way, because IU has tens of thousands of students, faculty, and staff who, when they leave the university environment, do not have connectivity anywhere near what they experience when they're on campus. And that, they've articulated can and has been an issue in, in recruitment and some of the projects that they may want to do in terms of doing, point-to-point, networks throughout the community. So I'm not really in a position to speak for them other than to say what I just did, that they are interested in seeing fiber be everywhere in the community. We have appreciated their consultation along the way throughout these years in this process.
Can I ask one more? So the other question that comes into my mind is the ISP provider, the relationship, it's an exclusive control by Meridium for 20 years, right? For picking the ISP provider? Am I right? No?
There will be an initial ISP for that 5 years, plus the potential of an extension for 2 if they meet performance goals, and then after that, it's an open network for the rest of the lifetime of the network, which at least in the terms of this, the Tif benefit, we're talking 20 years. Our contract is 25. It's so an alignment, but I would also say that once we hit the 25-year mark, if you want to think that far out, it's not that the network stops working, does not exist. And Meridium's general perspective is a very long-term investor in infrastructure. And so the exclusive period for this is ultimately going to be a fraction of the lifetime of this network. So it will be open access for quite some time.
Well, I appreciate that. I was poring over the documents and trying to see what that meant, and I didn't really see that the 5 to 7 year period, so I was assuming it was the 20-year period. And that seems to be a long time for exclusive, control over that. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I wanted to ask about use of the public right-of-way for building out the network. How would that go to the Board of Public Works for approval? How much disruption can we expect to see as far as, to pedestrian or vehicle access along the routes where, especially where it will go underground? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, the use of public rights-of-way will go through our, regular processes. There will be a permitting process, and there will be standards to which they are held in terms of, maintaining the public rights-of-way.
And related to that, I wanted to ask regarding the map. It seems to me that a lot of the area that has is closer to the center of the city and also has a lot of rentals, that's going to be mostly overhead lines, whereas the more suburban single-family areas are more where it's going to be underground. Now, from what I understand from others who are more expert than I, the underground is more stable and requires less maintenance. So could somebody speak to why there isn't more underground being proposed in areas where there's a digital divide, in the rental, lower income areas of the city?
I'll take a quick stab at that and then maybe call in Scott for backup. But essentially, the way that these are distributed is in a lot of those areas that you're noticing that are underground, there's not aerial cables available. So areas that are, fairly dense on a grid, will often have the poles available, and that makes it economic to be able to use that method. It's it's more costly to do it underground, and that's really why you see that kind of distribution. But I think there's some other factors that come into play. It's faster for Meridium to move forward with underground infrastructure because it goes through the city's permitting process, then they're able to execute it. On the pole side, on the aerial side, it has to go through Duke's process, which can be is constrained by the number of pole attachments that they wish to process in a certain amount of time. So there's also a speed to market aspect that leans towards underground.
And when you talk about the cost being lower to go aerial, does that take into account the full cost of the life of the cable? The maintenance there's more maintenance usually required, more downtime occurs when it's an aerial cable versus underground. Is that all taken into account when you're doing the cost-benefit analysis?
I'll turn that over to Scott. I suspect the answer will be yes, but
Yeah, we take in all of the considerations from the pole attachment fees, ongoing support. In the underground network, there's a lot of locates, as other utilities will deploy or improve their existing infrastructure. There's a lot of fees in locates, and we take all those into our ongoing operational model.
Okay, and this is with a view that Meridium would continue to own this infrastructure for decades?
Absolutely. I mean, in more than 20 years, we haven't sold any of our assets. When you take a look at who our investors are, it's pension funds who are looking for us to make an investment with a cash return over time. It is not to sell assets. And it's something that we can talk about, but in our agreement, we've also committed to the city that we won't sell the network in 10 years. We are in this for a long term. We are in this in a commitment to the city to put fiber in that can then scale with the requirements of technology over time. And we see fiber as the only technology that will support that going forward.
Now, you said there's a commitment in the document to not sell for 10 years, but the Tif agreement is for 20 years, so I'm a little confused as to the discrepancy there.
For the first 10 years, we cannot sell it, and then, like I said, we have not sold any assets over the last, 22 years, and then after that, we have to approach the city for an approval to sell the network. And we're comfortable doing that because it is not our intention, it has never been Meridium's intention or its business plan to sell assets.
Okay, thank you. Yep. So from the city's perspective, if Meridium were to sell after 10 or 12 years, then the new entity would have to be approved with the same terms and
yes,
would continue to see the benefit of the Tif District?
Yes, that's the understanding that we have been working on.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Additional second round questions. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I just had a thought. And of course, I'm not so sure we really want to own another utility for the reasons that you stated. But we do own one or operate one. And that utility, water, goes to every house. So has anything that we've talked about as far as infrastructure have anything to do with along the pathway of our water lines or water distribution lines with regard to burial or underground? I just thought about that. I'm sorry. It seems practical to me.
That's a good question and gets to some of the issues with underground. As you develop underground, you need to have visibility into where all of the existing utilities. That makes underground more complicated in the downtown area. It does have some value, but you have to navigate all of that infrastructure, and I know that's part of the planning and permitting process. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there are no other round twos, I'll take a turn here. Mr. Lehman, I believe, well, no, this is actually probably Mr. Dietz' thing. If we're, just explain this to me like I'm a 2-year-old. If Meridian sells 15 years out, then what happens to the proceeds from the TIF? They go to they go to the successor organization? They go to Meridian still?
That would be my understanding, but I'll look maybe to someone with more expertise on this than I. Rich.
And if you could introduce yourself, please, again.
Sure. Richard Starkey, law firm of Barnes & Thornburg. So technically, the agreement is with Hoosier Networks, LLC, and they would continue to own that agreement even if they sold. I mean, it's just like if you owned a bond and you are the beneficiary of that bond, it continues. Now, practically what happens in those situations, in my experience, is that is part of the, if they would sell, it's part of the sale of the entity, and the new entity would probably take over that as part of the negotiation of the sale, because it's obviously a benefit to whoever is paying the taxes.
Okay, thank you. Do we want to go to round 3, or do we want to hear from comments from this group? Why don't we, I know we have a number of people who would like to offer comment. So if you would, and you're here in chambers, please go ahead and approach the podium. Mr. Lucas, if you want to extend an invitation for those on Zoom.
Yes, if we have any members of the public that wish to comment on Ordinance 2219, this proposal, please use the raise hand feature to indicate your desire to speak. You can find the raise hand button in your control bar under the Reactions tab or the More tab. If you're not able to locate the raise hand button, please send a chat to the meeting host and we can recognize you that way.
Great. And about how many people intend to make comments in chambers? 1, 2, 3. And on Zoom, are we seeing any hands?
I see no raised hands at the moment.
Okay. Let's plan for 5 minutes.
That's correction, one raised hand right now.
Okay. Let's plan for 5 minutes, if only for the complexity of this issue. So if you would, please introduce yourself, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Matt Kelly. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Comcast Xfinity here in the state of Indiana. And all I'm wanting to speak about is about what Comcast provides today in Bloomington, just to make sure you understand the nature of our network and our services. So we offer service to at least 98% of the addresses here in the city of Bloomington on our existing network today. Since 2017, we have been offering a top speed of 1.2 gigabit download speeds here in the city, as well as across the rest of the state. And one of the things that we're very proud of, I know that this plan with the network that the city is proposing here is really about digital equity and inclusion and affordability. And Comcast is proud to have the oldest and largest digital equity program in the United States. Back in 2011, we started a program called Internet Essentials, which provided high-speed broadband for income-constrained households who receive any form of government assistance, such as the ones that were mentioned earlier by Mr. Dietz. And so we also today operate under the Affordable Connectivity Program for the FCC. And so we do provide free internet through that program. And one of the things that we're also proud of is more than 2,000 families here in Bloomington, the city of Bloomington, have received internet service through the Internet Essentials program. So since 2011. So that's in excess of approximately 9,000 of your citizens. So we're very proud of that fact, and we believe just as the city does, and they are exactly correct. We all understand the importance of the internet in our lives, and we really need to connect with those people that, for one reason or another, are deciding not to connect to the internet, whether it's they don't have a digital device, or maybe they're scared of having the internet in their house, whether it's cybersecurity concerns or spyware concerns, whatever it may be, or malware concerns. So we're just trying to see how we can educate the public and show them the benefits that they can see in their lives by connecting to the internet, what it can do for them. So that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yes, still just one hand raised at the moment, which is Russ Skiba, who should now be able to unmute.
Mr. Skiba, welcome. If you would please confirm your name, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Ms. Scambolari, and the council. I'm Russ Skiba. I live in the Hoosier Acres neighborhood. And I have to say, it is a very complex topic, and there is and ought to be a lot more conversation about it. But based on what I've heard tonight, I have to say I have some concerns about this. First of all, I wonder how we in any way would call this a digital equity plan, how this is an equity when low-income residents get only 1/4 of the upload and download speed of wealthier residents. It kind of confuses me. When I get my cable service, I have 3 or more different options. And the less I pay, the less service I get. That's not equity, that's business. That's business as usual. To do business as usual by giving less to those who pay less and calling it equity instead of business as usual, that's misleading. How does it in any way decrease the digital divide when up front we're telling folks that because they pay less, they are going to get less? They get 1/4 of what others get. It's a plan. I don't think it's equity. I also don't understand how this will increase competition. So we'd have one provider who's going to control 85% or more of the broadband in Bloomington for 5 to 7 years. And in fact, it's called exclusivity for 5 to 7 years. I'm just not sure how exclusivity lines up with increasing competition. And that, I would definitely agree with Councilmember Smith. He thought it was 20 years. I think 5 to 7 years is, that's a pretty long time to have exclusivity. What if we don't like that provider after 1 year? In a couple of places, finally, the presentation talked about transparency. I guess I'd like to ask and like to know how many Bloomington residents were involved in the consideration of this plan. Were there any neighborhood presentations made of this? How many residents got to hear about this agreement before it was signed? The other thing I noticed was I was able to attend about 15 minutes of the RDC meeting on Monday over Zoom. And in that 15 minutes, the Meridian representative 3 times told the commission that he couldn't answer the questions on the grounds of confidentiality. That was in 15 minutes. I don't know how many other times he might have said that during the evening. This whole process has been characterized by non-transparency. absolutely, this is such an important issue. Bloomington needs high-speed broadband, and we absolutely need and want digital equity. But this kind of rushed and non-transparent process, dumping this in the lap, into your lap as the city council at the 11th hour, and asking you to make a decision based on a contract you haven't even seen, that's not transparency. And it's not what Bloomington deserves. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Skiba. And here in council chambers, welcome. Please introduce yourself, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Dan Savickas, S-A-V-I-C-K-A-S. I am the Director of Tech Policy for the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, otherwise known as TPA. TPA, as our name aptly suggests, is a taxpayer and consumer watchdog group that seeks to educate the public on the impact of government policy and then hold policymakers accountable for said effects. We also seek to reduce debts and deficits and minimize the impact that taxation, spending, and regulations have on everyday Americans. As part of our missions, we've supported a wide variety of efforts to bridge the digital divide. We've worked hand in hand with members of the FCC as well as members of Congress to bridge that digital divide and increase connectivity across America. We applaud this council's efforts as well as even Meridium's efforts to bridge that digital divide. However, we don't believe this Spider Tif proposal is the correct approach to do so. According to data publicly available through the U.S. Census Bureau, and even cited by Mayor Hamilton as justification for this fiber agreement, 72% of Bloomington residents have access to high-speed internet, or rather are connected to high-speed internet. But according to that same data, that same publicly available data, 98% of residents have the ability to be connected if they chose. Getting the remaining 26% connected is an admirable goal, and further reaching connectivity to the remaining 2% is also an admirable goal. However, the data clearly shows that the issue is less one of existing access and one of adequate consumer education and choice. As has been noted a couple times, the Biden administration recently announced the Affordable Connectivity Program that makes broadband free for low-income households, and Bloomington residents can today, if they choose, get free service from AT&T, Comcast, or Smithville. The city's resources would be better spent educating residents about their existing options under the ACP. Unfortunately, the current plan before us today would use taxpayer resources to build out redundant infrastructure. TPA released a study in 2020 detailing the effects of similar undertakings in 30 cities across the United States, finding that they often failed to reach their connectivity goals, and found that the average penetration was only about 40% of residents. And in a city the size of Bloomington, that average connectivity penetration decreased to 35.4%. A number of these cities and municipalities had to sell the infrastructure at a considerable loss, with taxpayers left holding the bag. And make no mistake, this move would take tax money away from other services that could better serve the people of Bloomington. The $14.4 million across 20 years in personal property tax abatements represents $14.4 million in tax money that would go or could go to other city services that rely on property taxes to operate, including, but not limited to, public schools. Further, the letter of intent between the city and Meridium violates the spirit of good governance and could very well run afoul of Section 253 of the Telecommunications Act of '96, which preempts exclusive arrangements that favor one provider over another and therefore inhibit competition. The deal would give Meridium an advantage enjoyed by no other provider in the city. These include priority considerations for city contracts, expedited permitting, and free access to right-of-way. In addition, an as-yet unnamed ISP will get exclusive access to the network for an undisclosed amount of time. I believe we've heard 5 to 7 years kicked around here. Further, this deal would only require Meridium to connect 85% of the city, appreciably less than the 98% we believe have access or the ability to get connected currently, and appreciably less than 100%, which would ultimately be the goal. And the deal also allows Meridium to exclude commercially impractical or excessively expensive areas, which are most likely the areas to be at risk or not connected. Once again, TPA acknowledges the worthiness of the goals in play and the difficulty in attaining them, and again, we applaud all parties involved for trying to solve them. As part of our mission to protect taxpayers, we'd like to ensure the residents of Bloomington do not endure the fate of others in dozens of cities and municipalities who have attempted similar endeavors in the past. I appreciate your time and consideration of this matter.
Because I hope I pronounced that correctly. Yes. Good. So, Mr. Lucas, anyone on Zoom?
No, not that I see.
Okay, thank you. Next person here in chambers. If you could introduce yourself, you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Council. This is Christopher MG from the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. We have not taken any formal position and just started deliberating on this issue today at our Advocacy Council. But we appreciated Mr. Dietz and Mr. Allen's presentation to that body. One of the things on the presentation was, why are we here, which was to ensure Bloomington residents have and business have ubiquitous, affordable, high-speed fiber connectivity. We just want the council to remember that business is part of this, and this big $50 million investment deserves benefits for all citizens here in the community, including business. So as we move forward with this in a more formal way, we just want you to consider businesses and the disruption this may cause them and their patrons as we move forward. I thank you for your time and look forward to coming up with a more formal statement in meetings to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. MG. Welcome. Please share your name if you would, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Hi, Council. Sorry. Thank you, Chairperson Scambaluri, and I thank the Council for its time this evening. My name is David Wolf-Bender. I'm an IU student and a proud Bloomington resident. I love our city, and I think this partnership with Meridium is a welcome opportunity into our growing economy. I'll admit to you that I had no plans to give public comment this evening. However, I noticed the Taxpayer Protection Alliance was here, and I knew I needed to come voice my opinion on this evening. I welcome Mr. Savickas to our city. I hope he loves it as much as I do, and I hope he has a safe flight home to Washington. The TPA sent a letter to the Bloomington Redevelopment Commission urging them to oppose this project. Thankfully, they didn't listen, but I couldn't help but notice that at the bottom of the letter from TPA, the little line, Taxpayer Protection Alliance, Washington, D.C. Now, I'm a native of the nation's capital. I love Washington, D.C. It's always going to be a home to me. But for this issue, I really think that the best judges of whether or not this project is a good project are Bloomingtonians, the 9 decision makers who sit behind this bench, our duly elected mayor and his staff who are here this evening, the 80,000 Bloomington residents and the 40,000 of them who are students at Indiana University, who I believe this proposal will help, and the Bloomington Redevelopment Commission, which forwarded this proposal. I don't think we need a DC-based, Koch-funded organization to tell us what is or is not good for Bloomingtonians. I appreciate and respect the TPA's view, but I believe Bloomingtonians will see this as a project for what it is, a pro-equity, pro-business, net neutral fiber network. I urge the Committee of the Whole do pass on this tonight and move a favorable recommendation forward. Thank you so much.
Additional comments, either on Zoom or here in chambers? Seeing none, let's come back to council then for additional questions. And Councilmember Rollo.
I'd like to follow up on a resident's, one of his questions. Mr. Skiba mentioned, I'll begin with his last question, which I think was about transparency. And I've been a bit concerned about this because this is, it seems that this process got underway many months ago, and there have been discussions and negotiations going on for some time, but we haven't been privy to that on council. We've only known about it in the last couple of weeks. And of course, we all here are elected by constituents who take time to process information that's coming and evaluate it for themselves and then contact us in terms of their opinions. So this, what I see as an expedited process, does bother me somewhat. And that's actually why I voted against its introduction last week. So my question is, why the expedited process? Because you can see a very protracted time by which all these bodies are making decisions very quickly. And this is, the implications of this, we've all noted, are very profound. They're very, very large implications that are going to last decades. One of the questions, of course, was, as a public utility, which Fort Collins is undertaking, our sibling city, Palo Alto, is undertaking, deserves some consideration, I think, by this body, because this essentially locks us in for some period of time, quite a long period of time. So, who owns it? Who is going to manage it? Who derives the revenue from it? And, of course, I do appreciate the fact that Meridian is an investment firm. And so there's going to be sizable, as Council President Sandberg said, sizable revenue accruing. So my question is, why the expedited process? Why is this happening in just the period of a couple of weeks when this has been essentially discussed by the administration for quite a long time? Somebody like to venture some enlightenment there?
Thanks, Councilor Member Rollo, for that question. There's a number of factors to this. One, I would remind you also, the public, that we've had a public letter of intent that was in place before the end of last year, announcing that we intend to negotiate the particulars of an agreement with Meridian. We've been doing just that, and in terms of this process, one of our objectives in consultation with Meridian is to be able to enter into an agreement with them, with the Tif funding secured before the end of this month, and to do our best to accommodate the council's imminent recess. The delay of this project past the recess would add many months to the project, and in terms of the alignment of contracts on the build side, and Scott can speak to that a little bit better than I can. But from my standpoint, we're able to move forward with this process. That's all the sooner that members of our community who are left behind can participate in our digital equity program, which is compelling. It's $250 up and down, no cost to connect, free service, very broad eligibility criteria. So to me, there's an equity and in some respects a justice element to this. We want to address this in a powerful way with powerful tools, and that's what this provides, and it provides us the opportunity to do it in a fairly rapid way if we move forward. But I'll let Scott potentially address maybe some of the intricacies of what delay means in terms of the schedule. But thanks for your question, Scott.
So you're correct. We've been working on this for some time because it's a very complex issue in terms of looking at pulling fiber throughout a city the size of Bloomington. And in order to do that, there's a lot of field work, a lot of engineering that's required, a lot of cost data that needs to be pulled, a lot of competitive data that needs to be pulled that we need to do the research on. And then when that comes together, we want to look at deploying the fiber as quickly as possible. So we take a look at this again. I put the emphasis on fiber because that's the long-term technology. It's also the one that can provide broadband. And when I say broadband, we're talking about real speeds. We've heard today that there's a topic called broadband, and it's available throughout the city, but I invite you to take a look and see what that means. If somebody used the term broadband, it's 25 by 3. I don't know how many of you try to operate or work remotely on 25 by 3. 10 by 100 by 10. It is not the pleasant experience. It inhibits your ability to really do your job, complete your homework. What we're looking at, what we've been building on for months, is how do we bring fiber, not a broadband term that has lots of speed deltas in terms of what's available to people. And if you're downtown, you probably have fiber because the incumbents will build fiber to hit the businesses, the enterprises. If you're in a new established or in a new community, you've probably got fiber because, again, the incumbents will bring fiber to those new developments and perhaps to some of the high rises. What we're looking at is bringing fiber to all of the residents. I shouldn't say all, I should say at least 85% with a target of all of the residents within the city limits, whether it's the annex or the current, so that they can enjoy the speeds of fiber. We've heard also the topic of what's available to the low income, and I'd invite you to take a look and see what speeds are available at different levels. We're taking a look at bringing 250 by 250 up to everybody in the city, regardless of their capabilities. So when you ask the question, I know I'm expanding on it, what have we been working on for the months to bring this together? And it's only once we have all that data that we can bring it to a final conclusion that we know that we can implement with certainty.
Well, Mr. Lehman, let me rephrase the question. What do we stand to lose by delaying decision until we reconvene after council recess?
I mean, we've got the project teed up, ready to go. We've got materials orders ready and in place. We've got the labor market established and ready to deploy. You're familiar with the supply chain issues in today's market? We lose those reservations in terms of the ability to continue that lock-in period.
So the assumption was we would approve it, and you've already locked in essentially commitments to the project.
Not the assumption that you would approve it. We were building it towards a particular date so that we could keep our momentum going. If that does not take place, then we'll have to evaluate the reset provision and what that time frame takes a look at.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Additional round 3 questions. Councilmember Smith.
I guess I'm going to ask Mr. Dietz, how come we didn't get looped into this earlier? Because we're all pretty smart people, and we're all of a sudden got this packet. It's a big packet, complex material, no doubt. We're trying to make a good judgment, and do a good thing, and make a good vote. And I just find that why didn't we get looped in earlier on this?
I might defer a little bit to our corporation counsel on this, but I would say this is, a private business is considering locating into, our community, making a substantial investment, entering into a competitive environment. It makes sense that a significant aspect of that process would be private negotiations. And that was what we articulated in the letter of intent, that we're making this public, that this is an ongoing, that this effort is commencing in earnest to negotiate a contract with a private entity that, again, wants to do business in a competitive environment. And we are at the point where we have results of those discussions to share with you. And again, we're hoping to move forward the process in a way that seems in accordance with what city would do with other private enterprises that are considering selecting our community amongst competing communities for a substantial investment of capital and the development and employment and facilities. I don't know if my colleagues would want to.
You must understand the position that it puts us in to try to make a decision fast, on a company we're not real familiar with, and, you know, not to say anything negative about them at all. It's just like, all of a sudden, it's like, okay, you got to make a decision before June 15th or whatever it is. Yeah. So it's
Right.
kind of a little bit like, wow.
Yeah, and in some respects, this parallels what we were working on with, with Meridium as well back in, back in the day. Again, it's a private business wanting to enter into our market. Discussions are sensitive until we reach a point of maturity in those discussions where we bring that forward for your consideration.
Thank you. Beth Kate, Corporation Counsel. So to just expand, Councilmember Smith, on Mr. Dietz's comments. First, we did have an announcement back in November of the fact that the city was entering into negotiations with Meridium. I think that was known to council and to everyone else who saw and heard that announcement. A few weeks ago, we had another announcement by the mayor discussing in greater detail the deal that we were closing in on with Meridium and what the network build-out would accomplish. Meridium was there. We came a few weeks ago to a work session of council to talk about the Tif. The Tif came up a little bit later in the game, as I think Mr. Lehman may have alluded to earlier. The actual contract negotiations, the details of contract negotiations, as Mr. Dietz alluded to, I wouldn't expect to be talking with council as we go through those confidential negotiations on the details of this deal before it's matured. If you think back to what Mr. Dietz talked about with all of the other providers that we had months of negotiation with only for those deals to fall through for one reason or another, you could imagine why it's only until a negotiation reaches a state at which it really looks like it's going forward, that we're going to be in a position to ask the council to do something like approve a TIF. And with the TIF, just to be clear again, what that will do is to take the incremental taxes from the property taxes that Meridium would pay, that value, and give it back to Meridium minus a cut for the city to deal with the administrative costs. If there is no deal, if there is no investment, there is no tax revenue. So the TIF doesn't, what we're asking you to do is actually a fairly limited thing in that regard. While I'm up here, I will just go ahead and also respond, if I may, to a couple of the comments that we heard from other members of the public or people who came to give comments. To the gentleman from the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, the only thing I want to clarify for you all is that some of the comments he was making about terms were based on the letter of intent and non-binding terms of the letter of intent. And so the actual contract, the actual negotiated deal is what the deal is between Meridium and the city, and that does not include some of the things that he was alluding to earlier, like an indefinite time period for an ISP with Meridium. And I think there were one or two other things that he mentioned. Oh, I think one of them in particular was that Meridium has an unlimited ability to decide whether a place is economically infeasible to build. And so again, I would say he's making comments off of a document that is not the final negotiated deal. So just want to clarify on that, and otherwise I'll sit down unless there are other questions for me, in which case I'll pop back up. So thanks very much.
Yes, I wanted to inquire about Meridium or Hoosier, what's it called? Hoosier Networks, LLC, setting up its offices in Bloomington, and how many employees they might expect to employ, and at what kind of salary range. More traditional TIF questions, but relevant here as well, I think.
So from the Meridian perspective, or Hoosier Networks, which would be the local operating entity, we would expect to see between 8 and 12 people hired. And the salary range is, obviously There's quite a range on it, but most of them are going to be technical positions or executive type of positions with decision-making authority in the market. It's one of the things as you take a look at the overall network, though, the indirect employment will also be significant as we will contract locally for all of the connections from our main network into each one of those residences, each one of those units. And that's all local contracting revenue that would be in market going forward.
All right, thank you.
Right. This project does not 100% address every facet of the digital equity challenges that we face. It does make significant headway on the connectivity, the speed, the availability, and the affordability of high-speed fiber. To maybe double back on the fiber question about one of the only, or the primary constraint being the equipment on both ends. You can connect through through fiber optics at at 100 megabit, at a gigabit, at even higher and potentially much higher in the future, but that's dependent on the equipment that is transmitting the light and receiving the light and its capabilities. And that will increase over time, and that's why we generally say that once you have the fiber optic infrastructure in place, it's scalable well into the future, because through an investment in improved technology in the network gear, you can continue to grow the speeds that are possible to transmit through the fiber optic cable. And then back to your question about, well, how do we address that? I think that gets to having invested, having a partner like Meridiam help us address the elements of our digital equity gaps that they free up resources to be able to address some of those other questions. In particular on the hardware, for instance, through our digital equity grants fund. Over the past few years, we've provided support to the library to increase their loaner pool of equipment. And we have a digital equity grants round that, if you'll excuse me for an advertisement, the deadline for that, submitting for not-for-profits to submit for that is the 10th, in a couple of days at 5 p.m. So if any not-for-profits that have digital equity aspect to their programs, we'd be happy to have you submit for consideration for that, that funding source. But that's that side of things, the equipment and then also the training aspects are ones that aren't completely addressed by this initiative, but they're ones that we intend to focus more attention on as a city and for me as a department in ITS.
Sure. And it was pointed out to me just a minute ago that my microphone was off when I asked that question. Essentially, I asked about Mr. Dietz, just for the record, I asked about Mr. Dietz's comment in his slides that capacity is generally only limited by the electronics at each end. And I had asked him to clarify what might be done in that regard. So thank you. Sorry, Ms. Kate.
No problem. Beth Kate, Corporation Counsel. The only thing I wanted to add to Mr. Dietz's comments is just, or to elaborate on them, is to point you back to one thing that he mentioned in his slides about this deal, which includes an annual payment as a digital equity dividend by Meridium into the Digital Equity Fund, and that fund is open for use to assist people, for example, with devices. I think you may have mentioned devices earlier, and more broadly, other digital equity activities. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Additional questions before Councilmember Rollo? Are you going to comment?
Good. Yeah, maybe one more. Mr. Dietz, I wanted a little more specifics about the, I believe you said $85,000 per annum commitment by Meridium to the Digital Equity Fund. Mm-hmm. And what is the time frame? Is that for the duration of the TIF?
That is for the duration of the contract, which is 25 years.
25 years. And we are committing initially $1 million, is that correct?
Yes, that is the plan.
And that money is going to be appropriated this year? Are we seeing it, and where does it come from?
That will more likely than not come from TIF sources or potentially from ARPA sources. I think that's yet to be determined. When we move forward with this, we will establish a fund, and then it will need to be managed and appropriated in the way of all of our funds. So the council will see that request.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're sort of at round 3.5 right now. So are there additional questions before we go to comment? Councilmember Smith.
I have this question I want to ask Meridium is, so if you're going to spend, forgive me for asking it this way, if you're going to spend 50 or 85 million to do the infrastructure, how do you break even? Can you kind of just broadly tell me how that works so that, I understand part of the process so right now it appears that you're going to spend a lot of money and you're not going to get much back from my understanding of the material. Can you kind of just broadly tell me how that works, or is that something that's not, I should not be privy to or something? How does that work for you, for your business, for Meridium?
So we enter into the partnership with our ISP, and then through that, as they generate their revenues in the market, we get a portion of that revenue generation.
Thank you so much because I thought maybe that was how it worked, but I didn't know. So thank you very much.
Yep. Our success is tied to their success, which is tied to serving the residents of the community.
That fills in a lot for me. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Additional questions before we go to comment? On to comment then. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for their comments and presentation. First thing I'm going to say is what we went through tonight, the committee of the whole meeting, I think that's what this is for. And I've learned a lot tonight, and I think many of my colleagues have too. So I'll save my promo and all that for that. But committee of the whole is a good place to learn some things. And there's been some good points tonight from some of my colleagues. Transparency is an issue, has been in other issues, and it's an issue now, and particularly with council. So again, and we've said this before, there's certain things that we'll just have to work for or work toward from the standpoint of transparency between the administrative branch and the legislative branch. And we'll continue to do that. I think my colleagues have some good points in that regard. With regard to the in-use of equipment and how people can get some of those things, I really like those answers. One thing I will remind you with is that our current ISPs do not provide any of that now, never have. So to hold someone else we're contemplating and talking to a different standard that we're not already holding these people to, or these companies to, I think is a little bit unfair, just a little bit. So I just wanted to say that. I think there is a big difference between fiber and cable. Okay? When I came to this meeting tonight, I won't even mention the provider, but one of the TVs got the little thing, no signal, flipping around the TV. Okay, now many of us have poor connections, and when we were in Zoom meetings, we'd always had poor internet connections. Now, I'm not trying to blame anybody, but to me, it is no real comparison between cable and microfiber from an efficiency standpoint. And again, I'm just a layman guy. I'm just a facilities guy that retired after 30 years, so I may not know what I'm talking about. But I know when my TV don't work because the cable is weak. Okay, I do know that. My comments is I do expect to hear more of our questions answered when we're here next week. And understanding this is not a binding vote tonight, but to indicate my support of where we're headed, I plan on voting yes this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Rallo and then Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes, briefly, just a few comments to make. One is that the contract is yet to be, as was described by Corporation Counsel Kate, is the actual binding agreement, and so that's something I think that we should take time to review. And I'm not an attorney, but we have an attorney, and I would like to have it examined and determine if it's in our best interest. That means we probably won't have very much time before our decision is made, or we're asked to make a decision next Wednesday. So I have a lot of trepidation, again, about the rate at which we were going, the time window allowed for this. There's consideration of exclusivity, and I will be thinking about that. Weighing public benefit in comparison to what we have right now. And then future cost benefits for pursuing this model as opposed to, say, what other cities are doing, which is a public utility model. Realizing that this is an expensive proposition to lay the fiber, but it's no more expensive than some of the projects that we've undertaken as a city before, and the benefits that we have accrued from those utilities. And I think that a revenue potential of this is quite high. Otherwise, a private investment firm wouldn't be pursuing it. So with that in mind, I hope that we hear from constituents in the meantime, and appreciate people who have spoken this evening and the presentations made. I'll be passing this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I do want to commend everyone for all the work over all the years in getting us to this point. It is complex, as we have heard, and I respect the fact that when we're dealing with a private business, you may have to retain some confidentiality as those negotiations are taking place. But I have some concerns about the fact that here we are in our last couple of meetings before we're about to go into recess, and we are just now having the task of having to absorb all this and to determine, is this the right path or is this not the right path? And I'm not convinced yet, so I am going to be passing tonight. But I will just kind of share a few of my concerns that from tonight's meeting, where a lot of great questions were asked and a lot of answers were provided, I've got more questions that I will have next week that are generated from this meeting. Going back and looking at the history from Axia to where we are now, What concerns me is Axia fell through, Metronet fell through, Carlisle, Nomura, Allo, Ting, Metronet again. There were some discussions with Smithville, AT&T, Comcast. Then COVID happened. Then there was a digital equity survey. Then we went to Wired, who I guess recommended Meridian, and here we are. But what is our guarantee that Meridian is the better service? And what is our guarantee that there won't be the same instability that we've seen over the years if we've tried to get from there to here? Because to me, as we've all set up here, we're laymen, and that's forced all of us to go to the current providers and talk to them and go to some of our constituents that we trust that have broadband and internet capabilities that can kind of help us get up to speed to even ask the questions that we need to ask. It's been a journey to get here. We get that. We understand how complicated it is, but I hope you will appreciate, when I say you, I mean, the administration, that we are the fiduciary. We are the legislative branch. We're the ones that are going to have to make this decision about TIF, tax increment financing. And a comment was made toward the end of the presentation that the TIF will have a negligible impact to other taxing units. Well, I kind of want to know what impact might that have on other taxing units. So that's another question that I'll have for next week. I keep hearing the term transformational, and that's all very good. I know we all aspire to bridge this digital divide. It is extremely important. No one is against that. But I'm just not 100% secure in the knowledge that this is the right way to go. What is our guarantee? And then again, as the timeline, the letter of intent was signed August 27th. An announcement was made in November. Now, if an announcement was made in November, I'm not quite sure how that was done. I don't recall. It didn't register on my radar. Maybe there was a press release. I don't know. But it didn't trigger for me enough of a, ooh, this is coming. I better start getting prepared. I better start doing my research, until we recently heard about this in work sessions. And of course, some of us were invited to a pre-press release event before the press release actually came out recently. But then here we are trying to wrap our heads. We are the branch of government that now has the really hard task of approving a TIF. And we've got 2 more in the pipeline. When we come back from recess, we'll be considering 2 more. So this is big, and so I hope everyone will excuse us for not being 100%. It's kind of like the reasonable doubt has been put in my mind as of this particular meeting that's going to cause me to do a little bit more questioning and a little bit more research between now and next week. So thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Piedmont Smith and then Councilmember Smith.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I do want to just make sure everybody understands that what we're talking about tonight is, I'm sure my colleagues understand this, for the public to understand, is that the TIF is, so it's the amount of money that the Meridian would pay in business personal property tax that will be refunded to them. So it is only the amount that is assessed on the increased value of the property. So without this investment, we wouldn't have that money to begin with, and so we're not losing any money, basically. So just wanted to clarify that. I have a lot to think about. I don't know how I feel about the whole thing, but I wanted to just clarify that one point. Thank you.
And Councilmember Smith.
Well, thank you. Thanks to city staff, thanks to Meridian. It was very informative, and it really was very helpful, and to everybody that was involved. I'm going to pass because I want to see the agreement that Ms. Kate talked about. But I'm really happy that I think all our questions were answered, at least lots of them. We may have some more next week. We're council members, so. But thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments, or shall I take a turn? Okay. Thank you, everyone. I learned a lot this evening, and I've been reading this packet for several days, just like everyone else. And I appreciate all of the patience with questions from non-IT people, or this non-IT person anyway. I still have some uncertainty around this issue, and much of that is based on a couple things. First of all, I do want to see an agreement. I can't bring myself to vote favorably on 2219 without at least seeing this agreement. Second of all, I'm still snagging and would appreciate some conversation next week on why this is still the better business model. Is it just that we don't want to bond for it, or that bond is too heavy of a lift for our city? Why is this approach the better model for us? So I would appreciate some clarity on that. And I want to say I especially appreciate the emphasis on digital equity. And I am pleased that we have that goal front and center in this conversation. I'm still not clear on what we're going to do that's different, what the capabilities will be a difference. I'm hearing faster speeds, but I still worry about that 15%. And we have the goal of covering that, but we may not realistically based on the contract. So who's still left out is just a question I have. But again, I appreciate the discussion and the conversation and the patience and the responses tremendously. So I'll be passing this evening, but I look forward to the conversation next week. So thank you. With that, may I have a motion?
Move to pass.
It's been moved and seconded. I'm going to start on my right. Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
Councilmember Sandberg?
Pass.
Councilmember Rollo?
Pass.
Councilmember Smith?
Pass.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Pass.
And I will pass as well. That is 1 yes, 0 no, 5 pass. Thank you. Okay. We'll now move to Resolution 2213 to approve and issue the Plan Commission order found in Plan Commission Resolution RS 2322 regarding authorizing the Bloomington Redevelopment Commission to create a new Meridian Economic Development Allocation Area. Does anyone have additional comments from staff or on this cousin legislation that we have here? So,
Yes, no comment. Really, it's a companion to this. If you need additional information, then my colleagues can address it.
Got it. Thank you. So questions from council? Okay. Is that a yes?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I have no question.
Okay. No, not yet. But do we have comments from the public as well? I'm not seeing any here in chambers. Mr. Lucas, could you extend the Zoom invitation, please?
We do have a hand that's been raised for a while. I'm not sure if this individual would like to comment on the resolution, but if there are any members of the public who'd like to provide a public comment on Resolution 2213, you can use the raise hand feature to let us know. You can find that in your control bar under the Reactions tab or the More tab. And I saw our one hand go down. Or you can send a chat to the meeting host. I did have a chat that was requesting that I believe Deborah Meyerson offer a comment. I don't know if she would like to provide a public comment. But other than that, I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Give that just another minute. I'm not seeing anything here in chambers or any request to comment here in chambers. Mr. Lucas, have we had a raised hand?
I think it was lowered, and I think Ms. Meyerson has passed, so no comments.
Okay, thank you. Let's come back to council then. Any additional questions or comments? And if not, may I have a motion, please?
Move to pass.
Thank you. And I will start on my far left this time. Councilmember Piedmont Smith? Pass. Councilmember Smith?
Pass.
Councilmember Rollo?
Pass.
Councilmember Sandberg?
Pass.
Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
And I will pass. So that is 105. So with that, our business this evening is taken care of. We will continue the conversation next week. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.